Tonight we step quietly into the clay memory of ancient Sumer, where humanity's final century is not announced with thunder, but with scratched lines pressed into wet earth. You're not standing in a palace at first, you're in a storeroom, dim and close, where the air smells of dust, baked brick, and the faint mineral dryness of old river mud. On shelves in museums today, from the British Museum to the Penn Museum in Philadelphia, small tablets from Mesopotamia still carry the wedge-shaped marks of scribes who lived more than 4,000 years ago. Their hands are gone, their cities are dust, yet their words remain, patient and oddly awake. Archaeologists from the University of Chicago, Yale, and other major institutions have spent generations studying these clay archives. They confirm something simple and yet astonishing. The Sumerians wrote down kings, floods, temple rations, hymns, myths, lawsuits, field measurements, and arguments over beer. They did not write only for beauty. They wrote because order mattered. Grain had to be counted, gods had to be honoured, labour had to be assigned, memory had to be controlled. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the lamps grow low, tell us where you are listening from and what the local time is outside your window. Now your mind drifts south, into the land between rivers. The Euphrates moves slowly through reed beds, brown and shining under a pale sky. The Tigris runs colder and faster in the distance. Between them lies a flat country of mud brick walls, date palms, irrigation canals, and low temples rising like artificial hills. The sun does not merely shine here, it presses, it settles on shoulders, on rooftops, on the backs of oxen turning the soil. In the afternoon, even the flies seem tired. You walk past a doorway where a scribe sits cross-legged with a clay tablet in his palm. His reed stylus moves with calm precision. Each mark is a tiny act of survival. He does not know that someone in another age will call his script cuneiform. He does not know that scholars will one day puzzle over his numbers and divine names. To him, the tablet is a task, a record, perhaps a warning. The central mystery begins with a strange tension in these records. The Sumerians preserved stories of creation, kingship, divine command, an overwhelming flood. They spoke of a world arranged by powers older than cities. They imagined gods who measured out human labour, watched human noise, and sometimes regretted their own decisions. In some traditions, the end is not random, it is triggered. It begins when humanity becomes too much for the order that created it. That is where the unease enters softly. You're invited to listen as though each tablet is a broken tile from a much larger floor. No single piece gives the whole picture. A royal list may name cities that ruled before a great flood. A myth may whisper that humans were fashioned to serve divine needs. A later copy may preserve an older tale in altered language. Modern researchers debate how much of this should be read as memory, theology, royal ideology, or poetic structure. Yet the fragments keep turning toward the same question. What happens when the makers become disturbed by what they have made? The Sumerian King List is one of the most haunting records. Copies were found in Mesopotamia, and one famous prism now rests in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. It names kings who ruled before the flood, and it gives them reigns of impossible length. Some rule for tens of thousands of years. To modern eyes, the numbers feel unreal. To ancient listeners, they may have suggested a different kind of time. A time when kingship descended from heaven and history moved beneath divine permission. Here is the mainstream fact, quiet but firm. Sumer was not a fantasy kingdom. It was a real civilization, with cities such as Uruk, Lagash, Kish, and Nippur. Its people built temples, organised labour, developed one of the world's earliest writing systems, and shaped later Mesopotamian culture in lasting ways. Archaeology confirms the weight of their world in bricks, seals, tablets, canals, graves, tools, and administrative records. But then comes the quirky fringe tidbit, the sort that clings to the edge of the candlelight. Some modern readers have claimed that the long-lived kings were not symbolic rulers at all, but evidence of lost beings, visitors, or forgotten sciences. Serious historians do not accept that claim as established evidence. Still, the fascination is understandable when a tablet calmly says a king ruled longer than any human body could endure. The imagination wakes up and starts walking barefoot through forbidden rooms. Perhaps that is why these records remain so powerful. They are official and dreamlike at the same time. They count barley, then speak of gods. They list cities, then a place of flood like a black line across existence. They make the ancient world feel practical, sacred, and slightly unstable. You sense a civilization trying to hold everything together with clay, ritual, and memory. In the imagined final century, nothing begins as a disaster. That is important. The end of humanity does not arrive first as a roaring wall of water. It begins as ordinary life. A woman needs bread in a courtyard. A child carries reeds by the canal. A priest washes his hands before entering the temple. A farmer watches the river level with narrowed eyes. A scribe notices that the figures do not comfort him as they once did. Clay remembers slowly. The first hint of the final century is not a date. It is a pattern. The records place humanity inside a system of obligation. The gods create order, humans maintain it, temples feed gods through offerings, fields feed temples through labour. Kings claim authority by serving divine plans. The whole structure depends on balance, and balance is a fragile thing in a land where river, drought, salt, and ambition all have teeth. Scholars still debate whether the Great Flood traditions reflect memories of real regional flooding, symbolic renewal, political theology, or a combination of several ancient experiences. No careful historian can flatten the matter into one easy answer. That uncertainty is part of the spell. You're not given a locked door with a label. You're given a corridor, and somewhere far ahead, water is moving in the dark. You hold the idea gently now. The Sumerian record may not tell us that every human life ended in a single century. It may tell us something stranger. It may preserve the ancient fear that humanity's permission to exist could be reviewed, shortened, or revoked. A world made for service might one day become a world accused of excess. A species shaped from clay might be returned to mud. Outside, the plain darkens. The last heat rises from the bricks. Somewhere beyond the city wall, frogs call from the marshes, and the river slides through reeds without explaining itself. In a small room, a tablet is left to dry. The marks harden, the warning sleeps, and you remain there. Close to the beginning, listening to the clay. The city wakes before the sun has fully lifted, and you move with it through streets still blue with night. Uruk rises around you in mud brick terraces, courtyards and storage rooms, and narrow lanes where sandals scuff dust from yesterday. A donkey brays near a gate. A woman shakes chaff from a woven basket. Somewhere, behind thick temple walls, servants prepare offerings for powers that never sleep, or at least are never allowed to seem absent. The air tastes of river damp and hearth smoke. Date syrup warms in clay jars. Fish dries on reed mats. Fresh bread cools on flat stones. There is a softness in these morning details, but it is not peace exactly, it is repetition. It is a civilization holding its breath by doing the same tasks again and again. You stand among people who do not know they are living inside a mystery. They are not characters in a prophecy. They are buyers, sellers, porters, potters, shepherds, brewers, mourners, singers, mothers, widowers, borrowed apprentices, and very serious men arguing over the correct measure of grain. The final century, if such a thing can be imagined from the tablets, does not begin with a trumpet. It begins with inventory. A scribe enters a small office beside a temple storehouse. His tablet is damp and smooth, ready to receive numbers. He records jars of oil, bundles of reeds, wool weighed for workers, grain allotted for labour teams, and beer distributed as rations. Last detail often surprises modern listeners. In Sumer, beer was not only a pleasure, it was food, payment, ritual, and relief. One might say, with gentle sarcasm, that civilization was partly powered by paperwork and low-strength beer. Not exactly the heroic image carved on royal monuments, but probably more honest. Records from the great cities confirm that Sumerian urban life was deeply organized. Excavations and tablet archives reveal temples acting as economic centers, employing workers, storing goods, and supervising fields. Scholars at institutions such as the University of Chicago have shown how administrative tablets open a window into daily systems of labor and distribution. The grand myths may speak from the heavens, but the clay receipts speak from kitchens, fields, and counting rooms. You pass from Uruk in thought toward Eridu, the old city near the marsh here, where tradition placed one of the earliest seats of kingship. There, the landscape feels lower, wetter, and stranger. Weeds grow tall enough to hide a standing man. Birds rise suddenly from the water with a slap of wings. The temple platform stands above the marsh like a memory trying to keep dry. In the old stories, Eridu belongs closely to Enki, lord of wisdom, fresh water, craft, and hidden counsel. A fisherman poles a narrow boat along a canal. His arms move without hurry. He knows the water by smell, by colour, by the small trembling of reeds. Yet even he sometimes looks at the river with suspicion. A canal can feed a city. It can also fail it. It can silt, flood, turn brackish, or become a border between hungry neighbours. In this land, water is never just scenery. Water is law. The cities before the warning are full of confidence because they must be. Their walls say permanence. Their temples say favour. Their markets say tomorrow will resemble today. But beneath the clay floors, the pattern is less secure. Salt gathers slowly in irrigated fields. River channels wander. Harvests vary. Labourers complain. Rulers demand more bricks, more offerings, more soldiers, more obedience. A civilization can look strong while becoming tired inside. That is one of history's quiet tricks. In Nippur, the sacred city of Enlil, the atmosphere changes again. You feel less marsh wind and more ceremony. The god's temple dominates the imagination of the place, because Nippur was not merely another settlement. It was a religious heart. Kings from competing cities sought legitimacy there, as though power needed to pass through a sacred doorway before people would truly believe it. To rule land was one thing, to rule with divine approval was another matter entirely. A priest moves through a courtyard washed clean at dawn. Incense curls upward. Bitter and sweet, a bronze vessel glints in the first light. The priest's fingers are careful, almost tender. As he prepares the offering, he knows the form must be right. A missed word, a spoiled portion, an unclean hand, a poorly timed chant. All of these can feel dangerous in a world where ritual is not decoration, but maintenance. The mainstream fact is plain enough. Sumerian cities were politically separate, often competing or fighting, yet they shared language, scribal habits, religious ideas, and artistic forms. They formed a network rather than a single nation. Their rulers built temples, sponsored canals, fought neighbours, and claimed divine backing. Their world was local and cosmic at once, which is a difficult combination for any society to manage. Then there is the strange tidbit, small but memorable. Ancient Mesopotamian omen traditions sometimes treated unusual births, odd animal behaviour, strange weather, or malformed objects as signs worthy of interpretation. A lamb born with unusual features could trouble a court more than an enemy rumour. The detail feels almost comic at first, until you remember that anxiety always looks strange from a distance. Modern people check market charts, satellite warnings, and medical scans. They watch sheep. In the streets, life continues. A girl carries a water jar too large for her shoulders. Two men repair a wall with wet clay, pressing each brick into place. A merchant inspects lapis lazuli brought from far mountains, its blue surface deeper than evening. A potter curses softly when a vessel cracks in the kiln. Dogs sleep in shade. Children chase one another past a line of reed baskets. All of it feels solid because it is so ordinary, yet the temples keep watching. The hidden tension in these cities lies in their dependence on unseen permission. People plant because the seasons should turtle, they obey because kings should protect, they give offerings because gods should remain favourable, they record goods because order should be measurable, but the word should is a fragile little bridge over dark water. What happens when the bridge trembles? Among scholars, there is continuing debate over how literally ancient Mesopotamians understood divine presence in statues, temples, and ritual meals. Some researchers emphasize political theatre and symbolic authority. Others stress that these communities likely experienced the divine as socially real, woven into food, law, illness, weather, and kingship. The safest answer is not the coldest one. Their belief was not an idea stored in the head. It was a world lived through the body. You feel that in the heat rising from a temple wall. You hear it in the squeak of sandals on packed earth. You smell it in oil, smoke, clay, and animal hide. The city is not waiting for doom. It is feeding itself, counting itself, blessing itself, and flattering the powers above. That is what makes the warning more unsettling. It approaches a world still busy with its errands. Near evening, Uruk glows red along its upper walls. The great precinct gathers shadow. Work gangs return from the canals, shoulders bent, voices low. A scribe seals a tablet and places it with many others, each one a small command against forgetfulness. Beyond the city, fields stretch toward a darkening horizon, patterned by ditches and footpaths. The river moves quietly, carrying silt, fish, secrets, and perhaps the first faint rumour of change. No one stops to listen for it. Kingship settles over the land like a shadow with a crown. You feel it not only in palaces, but in grain measures, canal orders, temple hymns, and the silence that follows a royal name. A king in Sumer's is not merely a strong man with soldiers. He is a hinge between earth and heaven, or at least he must persuade everyone that he is. Without that sacred hinge, a city becomes only bricks, hunger, and men shouting in courtyards. You enter a scribal room where the light is low and yellow. Tablets are stacked like sleeping animals along the wall. Some are small enough to fit in one hand, others are thick, heavy, and official, shaped for memory rather than convenience. Young apprentice leans close to his teacher, copying names from older clay. The list begins not with local gossip, but with a claim as immense as the sky itself. Kingship descended from heaven. That sentence changes the room. The Sumerian King List is one of the great strange documents of early history. Copies from different periods preserve a sequence of cities and rulers, moving kingship from one city to another, as though authority itself travels. Eridu, Bad-Tibira, Larak, Sippar, and Shurupak appear in traditions connected with the time before the flood. Then the flood comes, and kingship descends again. The pattern is spec, almost cold, which makes it more unsettling. Records confirm that ancient Mesopotamian rulers used lists, inscriptions, and temple building to anchor their power in sacred tradition. Scholars at Oxford and Yale have studied how these king lists do more than preserve names. They organise the past, they turn competing city histories into a single procession, as if the gods passed authority from hand to hand. It is history. Yes, but history wearing ceremonial clothing. You look down at the impossible reign lengths. One king rules for 28,800 years, another for 36,000 years. The numbers are too vast for a human body, too neat for accident, too solemn to dismiss as mere nonsense. They belong to a different mental climate, where time can swell to honour antiquity, divinity, or lost order. The list does not blush. It simply states the impossible and continues. That calmness is the haunting part. In the imagined final century, such numbers begin to feel like a measuring rod held against human smallness. The old kings ruled for ages. Later kings rule for shorter spans. Divine patience seems to contract. The world does not end because one man fails. It becomes narrower because the structure itself begins to change. Time, once generous and mythic, can start tightening around mortal life. A ruler in Kish sits beneath a canopy, listening to petitions. His robe is heavy with patterned cloth. His beard is oiled. His attendants stand close enough to hear everything, and too far away to be blamed for anything. A canal has broken near the fields. A temple estate complains of missing barley. Merchants demand protection on a road. A widow pleads over disputed land. The king must answer as though order can be restored by command. Perhaps it can for a while. The city expects him to keep the boundary between chaos and life. He must maintain canals, protect storehouses, honour gods, restrain enemies, and punish fraud. Every failure has a practical face. A neglected canal means thirst. A failed harvest means debt. A broken treaty means widows. Yet every failure also has a divine echo. Did the god withdraw favour? Did the king offend heaven? Did the people neglect the appointed rites? Here the scholarly debate grows especially delicate. Some researchers see the king list as political propaganda, crafted to legitimize later dynasties by arranging earlier rulers into a sacred chain. Others view it as a memory structure that preserves fragments of older traditions, reshaped by scribes for religious and royal purposes. The debate remains open because clay can preserve words, but not always the reasons a scribe chose them. You listen to the apprentice read the names under his breath. His voice catches on a difficult sign. The teacher taps the bell, not harshly, but with the patience of someone who knows tradition must be repeated perfectly. Outside, wheels grind in the street. Somewhere a goat complains with excellent timing. Because even in sacred history, goats refuse dignity. A quirky fringed tidbit clings to these reigns like dust to wet feet. Some modern enthusiasts have argued that the huge numbers encode astronomy, precession, or secret calendars from a lost civilization. Mainstream historians remain cautious, and often more than cautious, yet the fascination reveals something genuine. Ancient numbers can feel like locked doors. When a culture writes 36,000 years on clay, people naturally search for the key. Still, the list's power does not require hidden machinery. Its emotional force is simpler. It tells you that human rule is temporary, but kingship is not. One king dies, another takes the throne. One city rises, another city receives the divine gift. Authority survives individuals, drifting from place to place like a sacred flame that sometimes burns the hand carrying it. In this world, the final century is not counted in modern calendars. It is sensed through compression. The reigns grow shorter. The relationship between heaven and earth feels less spacious. The old heroic time recedes like floodwater from a wall, leaving stains no one knows how to clean. The people still live, trade, marry, pray, and complain. But above them, the architecture of permission may be changing. Imagine the royal archive at dusk. The room is warmer than it should be. Dust floats in the last light. A seal impression dries on a tablet, showing figures in formal procession. The king's name is clear. His title is clearer. His mortality is not mentioned. Ancient power is very good at avoiding that subject, yet mortality waits in every line. A temple singer chants the king's praise during a festival. The crowd hears that he is mighty, beloved, chosen, shepherd of the people. The words soothe the city because cities need soothing. But somewhere in the scribal tradition, the older list remembers rulers so vast that the living king seems almost brief. His reign, impressive to his subjects, is only a spark against those impossible ages. That contrast may be the warning hidden inside the praise. The last century of humanity, as a narrative drawn from these fragments, begins with the shrinking of scale, war, not collapse yet, not flood, not the storm sealing doors and lifting boats from their moorings. It begins with the discovery that even kings are tenants. They borrow time. They borrow names. They borrow legitimacy from gods who may one day call in the debt. Night closes around the archive. The apprentice leaves with clay under his fingernails. His teacher covers the tablets and steps into the cooling street. Above the flat roofs, the first stars appear, distant and unworried. Below them, the king's city glows with lamps, arguments, prayers, and the smell of cooking grain. On a shelf, the list remains. Its names sit in darkness, counting. The sky becomes an archive no hand can close. You stand on a temple roof where the night air is cooled, and the bricks beneath your feet still hold the memory of the day's heat. Below, the city murmurs in fragments. A dog barks once, a door bar drops into places somewhere, a baby cries, then quiets. Above you, the stars appear one by one, as if they are being uncovered by an invisible scribe. The priests who watch them do not seem surprised. They have climbed these stairs many times. Their robes carry the smell of oil, wool, and smoke. One holds a small lamp shielded against the wind. Another studies the horizon, where the last copper glow has faded. Their attention is calm, practiced, and slightly severe. They are not here to admire beauty. They are here to notice disturbance. In Mesopotamia, the heavens are not empty distance. They are a writing surface. A bright planet can be a message. An eclipse can be a warning. A halo around the moon may trouble a court. The sky does not simply hang over human affairs, it participates to modern eyes. This may sound poetic, but for ancient observers, it was also administrative. The gods had departments everywhere, even among the stars. Records from Mesopotamia confirm that celestial observation became a major scholarly tradition. Later Babylonian astronomers preserved detailed omen series and planetary records. Building on older habits of watching the night, researchers at institutions such as Brown, Chicago, and Oxford have studied how these traditions joined observation with interpretation. The result was not astronomy in the modern sense alone, it was skywatching with consequences. You feel the patience required. There are no glass lenses here, no humming instruments, no cold screen glowing in a quiet laboratory. There is only the naked eye, trained memory, repeated nights, and the slow comparison of one sign with another. A priest must know where a star should rise. He must sense whether the moon seems bruised, dim, delayed, or strange. That is not superstition in its lazy form. It is disciplined anxiety. Disciplined anxiety built civilizations. A young assistant brings a tablet still soft enough for writing. He kneels near the older observer and waits. The moon has climbed above the roofline, pale and watchful. The older man speaks quietly. The assistant presses marks into clay. The signs note time, direction, brightness, and meaning. In another room, perhaps, earlier tablets sit nearby, forming to memory longer than any living priest. The heavens are being compared with themselves. This is where the final century gains a new texture. The warning is no longer only in kingship or flood memory. It begins to shimmer overhead. If the gods choose to speak before disaster, surely the sky is one of their older languages. The canals may crack. The fields may salt. The king may boast, but the heavens keep a colder record. They do not flatter anyone. You look toward Venus, bright enough to feel deliberate, to Sumerians and their successors. This shining planet was linked with Inanna, a goddess of love, war, power, and terrifying vitality. She is not a soft figure in the ancient imagination. She is desire with a weapon. She is beauty that can overturn a city. Her star moves from evening to morning, disappearing and returning, like a divine presence passing through hidden chambers. A quirky tidbit floats up from the margins of omen lore. Later Mesopotamian scholars sometimes treated the behaviour of planets like court politics in the sky. A planet appearing in an unusual place might suggest a god entering another god's territory, which sounds oddly like palace gossip written across the heavens. Even the stars, it seems, could be accused of poor manners. Still, beneath the humour is a serious question. Did ancient observers believe these signs caused events, predicted them, mirrored them, or revealed decisions already made by the gods? Scholars continue to debate this with care. Some emphasize divination as a system of statecraft, giving rulers a way to manage fear. Others argue that omen reading expressed a genuine cosmic logic, where heaven and earth reflected one another. The evidence allows both caution and wonder. The priest turns toward the western horizon. Dust from distant fields blurs the lower stars. A faint wind moves across the roof, carrying the smell of baked clay and canal water. He narrows his eyes. Perhaps nothing unusual is happening. Perhaps everything is happening too slowly for one life to understand. The most frightening warnings are not always sudden. Some are gradual arrangements. In the city below, people sleep without consulting the constellations. A brewer dreams of a missing jar. A widow dreams of her husband's voice at the door. A trader dreams of bluestone and safe roads. A child dreams of a bull with silver horns. Their dreams rise and vanish, while the priests above continue watching the larger dream. The imagined final century does not require a single blazing comet. It may unfold through accumulation, a darkened moon during a tense season, a planet vanishing when the king needs reassurance, a storm at the wrong festival, a birth omen that chills the palace. Each sign alone might be explained away. Together they become a net, and once people believe they are caught in a net, every movement feels meaningful. That is the danger of signs. They multiply, yet you cannot mock them too easily. Modern people also read patterns in distant things. They watch charts, forecasts, data streams, warnings from satellites, reports from climate stations, images from deep space telescopes. They know more about physical causes, but they still ask the same human question. What is coming toward us, and how much time remains? A senior priest descends the temple stair before dawn. His knees ache. His lamp is nearly smashed down. The clay tablet is wrapped for safekeeping. He passes a relief carved into a wall, its figures stern and still. At the bottom of the stair, servants are already preparing the morning offerings. Life resumes because life is rude that way. It rarely waits for cosmic interpretation to finish. In a palace chamber, the king may receive the report. Perhaps the sign is favourable, perhaps not. If unfavourable, rituals can be ordered, sacrifices can be made, prayers can be recited, substitute ceremonies may be arranged, because Mesopotamian ritual sometimes sought not only to understand fate, but to bargain with it. The future, like a difficult official, might be approached through proper channels. You stand again beneath the fading stars. The eastern horizon grows pale. birds stir in the reeds. The sky that seemed full of secret writing becomes ordinary blue. That transformation is almost cruel. At night, heaven appears crowded with messages. By morning, it offers only light, heat, and distance. But the tablet remains. Its marks say that someone watched, someone noticed, someone believed the silence overhead was not silence at all. In the slow reconstruction of humanity's last century, the sky begins to answer without raising its voice. It offers no clear sentence, only signs. The moon dims, the planet shifts, the horizon glows with dust. A priest grows old measuring fear in the language of stars. And far above the sleeping city, the heavens keep their council. The council does not gather in a place you can reach by road. It forms in the upper distance of imagination, beyond roof smoke, beyond bird flight, beyond the pale stations of the moon. You sense it through broken stories, through divine names pressed into clay, through myths copied by scribes who were not inventing entertainment, but handling sacred danger. The gods are not presented as peaceful ornaments. They speak, disagree, command, complain, and sometimes fear the noise below. You're standing now in the shadow of a temple wall at Nippur, where the name of Enlil carries weight like weather. Around you, the city prepares for ritual. Water is poured, incense catches flame. Priests move with trained caution. Their bodies know the gestures long before thought arrives. Every movement suggests that heaven is not far away. It is near enough to offend. The forgotten assembly of gods is one of the most unsettling patterns in Mesopotamian tradition. In later Akkadian and Babylonian versions of older flood traditions, divine beings debate the fate of humanity. The world has become crowded, restless, and loud. Human activity rises like smoke, and the gods are disturbed. The decision to destroy is not always shown as simple rage. It appears as policy, exhaustion, and divine frustration. That is colder than anger passes, policy remains. Mainstream scholarship confirms that Mesopotamian myths often depict the gods as a structured community, with ranks, responsibilities, rivalries, and councils. Researchers at universities such as Chicago, Yale, and Oxford have long studied how divine assemblies mirror the political life of Ziusudra. The gods deliberate like rulers, command like kings, and quarrel like powerful relatives trapped at a very long banquet. It is cosmic order imagined through social order. You can almost hear the chamber, though it is not a chamber. The silence is vast, but not empty. Great presences gather, each carrying a domain of existence. Enlil, lord of wind, storm, and command, stands at the centre of authority. Enki, associated with wisdom and fresh water, remains more difficult to read. Inanna burns with force and contradiction. Ninhursag carries ancient depth. The memory of birth, soil and body. Anu is remote, high, and almost too distant for human speech. They do not need to shout. Immortals have no reason to rush. Below them, humanity labours. Fields are cut, bricks are moulded, boats are loaded with grain and wool. Songs rise from courtyards, arguments flare near market stalls, hammers strike, children laugh, dogs bark, drums sound in festivals. To humans, this is life. To the gods in the stories, it may become disturbance. The strange thing is how ordinary the accusation feels. Humanity is not destroyed because it becomes evil in some grand philosophical sense. In several Mesopotamian traditions, the problem is excess. Too many people, too much noise, too much burden on divine rest. It is almost darkly comic, in the way ancient myth sometimes is. The universe creates workers, then complains that the workers allowed fairy management, honestly. Yet the humour fades quickly. A quirky fringe tidbit sometimes attached to these myths claims that the Divine Council resembles a memory of ancient rulers from a lost technological age. Popular writers have imagined the gods as administrators of an earlier civilization, managing human labour like an engineered workforce. Professional historians treat that as speculation outside the evidence. Still, the appeal is obvious. These gods do behave like a bureaucracy with thunder privileges. The more careful mystery is not whether the gods were literal visitors, it is why the ancient imagination framed creation as labour management. Humans are not only beloved creatures in these texts, they're useful, they dig canals, raise temples, provide offerings, and sustain the divine household. Existence itself is arranged like an estate, and humanity is placed within it as a necessary workforce. That makes the council's decision more chilling. If humans were made to relieve the gods of labour, then the final century begins when the solution becomes a new problem. The tool becomes noisy, the servant becomes numerous, the created order begins to press against its makers. Perhaps every system fears the moment its own success becomes unbearable. The temple courtyard grows warmer as the morning advances. A priest recites a hymn, and the words pass over listeners like cool water. The city needs the gods to remain satisfied. That is the quiet terror behind all offerings. A sacrificed animal, a poured libation, a bowl of grain, a song at dawn. These are not merely gifts, they are repairs. They mend a relationship that can fray. Scholars still debate how much the divine assembly in these myths reflects actual political experience among competing city-states. One group reads the Heavenly Council as a mirror of human institutions, where elders and rulers negotiate authority. Another approach sees it as a theological attempt to explain disaster, giving shape to suffering by imagining decisions above the clouds. Both readings can sit together uneasily, like strangers sharing a bench in a dark shrine. You imagine the council receiving reports from below. The cities have multiplied, the offerings have increased, yet so has unrest. Kings boast too loudly, workers groan under burdens. Rituals are performed, but not always with sincerity. The earth trembles with tools and voices. From the divine height, humanity may no longer look like a solution. It may look like a spreading sound. A lesser god perhaps speaks first, nervous and formal. Another complains of sleeplessness. Another fears disorder. Enlil's authority hardens the air. The decision gathers slowly, like storm clouds forming beyond a flat horizon. No one below has voted. No shepherd in the marsh. No brewer in the city. No widow at the gate. No child chasing a hoop through dust. The assembly exists beyond appeal. This is the unsettling heart of the hidden timeline. Human destiny is decided elsewhere. Not in the market, not in the palace, not in the field where backs ache under the sun. The final century is triggered when heaven stops regarding humanity as a fragile companion and begins treating it as a disturbance. The change is subtle, but absolute. A species can continue living long after its verdict has been spoken. That thought settles heavily. Still, the myths do not offer a simple machine. Divine beings disagree. One god may push toward destruction. Another may preserve a loophole. One command may be sealed, while another is whispered through a wall or dream. The council is not a clean court of law. It is a family of powers, and families are rarely tidy, especially when they rule the cosmos. Near sunset, the temple casts a long triangular shadow across the ground. Workers carry baskets of clay. A singer's voice rises from somewhere inside. Thin and beautiful, the scent of incense mixes with sweat and baked mud. You feel how small a human body is within this arrangement, and how stubbornly it continues moving. The gods in council remain unseen, but their imagined decision darkens the air around every ordinary task. A bowl is filled, a door is closed, A child is lifted into tired arms. The world continues because nobody has told it to stop. Yet above the warm roofs and pale canals, a verdict may already be forming in the silence. And silence, in these records, is never quite empty. The whisper begins where command loses its certainty. You enter Eridu in the blue hour, when the marsh water reflects the last light and the temple platform seems to float above reeds. The air is damp against your skin. Frogs call from hidden places. A heron stands motionless near the canal, thin as a carved sign. Nothing here feels hurried. Even danger seems to move with the slow patience of water. Eridu belongs to beginnings. In Sumerian tradition, it is among the first cities to receive kingship. It is also bound to Enki, the clever lord of fresh water, wisdom, craft, and secret knowledge. His presence is not like the high storm of Enlil. It is lower, more inward, and harder to trap in simple words. Enki does not always break a decree, sometimes he bends around it. That is what makes him dangerous. You stand outside a reed hut near the edge of the marsh. Its walls tremble slightly in the night wind. Inside, someone is listening. Not a king in a throne room, not a priest in public ceremony. A man half awake, perhaps, with the smell of river mud still on his hands. A voice moves through the wall, or through a dream, or through the soft boundary between fear and sleep. The instruction is not shouted. It arrives like a secret meant to survive obedience. In Mesopotamian flood traditions, a divine warning is given to a chosen survivor. In the later Akkadian story, the god Ea, closely related to Enki, speaks indirectly so that a human may prepare for catastrophe. The detail matters because the god does not simply announce rebellion. He works through careful language, speaking to a wall, a reed house, or a dreamlike listener. It is almost legalistic, which feels very Mesopotamian, and somehow funnier than it should. Mainstream research confirms that Mesopotamian scribes transmitted flood stories across centuries in Sumerian, Akkadian, and later Babylonian forms. Scholars at major universities, including Oxford and Chicago, have shown that these versions differ in names, structure, and emphasis, yet preserve a repeated pattern. A divine decision threatens humanity, a wise god provides a warning, a survivor preserves life through preparation. The hidden contradiction is small, but enormous. If the gods have decided humanity must end, why does one god preserve a remnant? Is it mercy, strategy, regret? A loophole in divine procedure? Or is Enki protecting not humanity as a moral cause, but the system that depends on humans? A world without workers, offerings, songs, and smoke rising from altars might also become unbearable for the gods. Perhaps mercy and usefulness are not always separate. The marsh thickens around you. Reeds scrape softly against one another. A boat knocks against its mooring post. You hear insects, water, distant cattle, and the faint murmur of someone awake too late. In this imagined moment, the final century sharpens into personal instruction. Disaster is no longer only a cosmic decision, it becomes a task list. Take wood as seal gap by, gather seed, bring living things, and listen carefully. Tell no one too clearly. The chosen person must carry knowledge that cannot be shared in ordinary speech. That burden is terrible. A warning loses power if it is too vague, but it becomes dangerous if spoken plainly. Imagine knowing that the world's surface will change, while neighbours complain about bread prices and roof repairs. Imagine measuring beans while people laugh at your strange new project. A boat in dry weather always attracts opinions. Humanity has never lacked experts in other people's business. A quirky fringe tradition in modern retellings imagines Enki as a guardian of hidden science, the keeper of ancient engineering that survives a world-ending flood. Some have claimed the Ark instruction hides technical memory of a lost advanced culture. Historians do not treat such claims as demonstrated, but the emotional logic is clear. When a myth gives building instructions before disaster, listeners naturally wonder whether memory is hiding inside symbol. Still, the deeper power is not technological. It is moral ambiguity. Enki's whispered contradiction refuses a clean story. The divine order condemns humanity, yet divine wisdom preserves it. The same cosmos that threatens extinction leaves an opening. You're not watching simple doom, you're watching disagreement inside eternity. Scholars continue to debate whether Enki's warning should be read mainly as theology, political metaphor, ritual memory, or adaptation of older flood experience. Some emphasize the god's role as culture hero, bringing craft and survival knowledge to humans. Others read the story as a meditation on divine limits, where even gods cannot fully control the consequences of their own decrees. The clay does not decide for us. It gives the question a body. You kneel beside the reed wall. The voice behind it is indirect, almost teasing, but beneath the cleverness lies urgency. Do not build a house, build a boat. Do not seek possessions, seek life. Do not trust the ground, because the ground itself will be taken. The message turns the listener's understanding inside out. Stability becomes danger. Water becomes shelter. Secrecy becomes obedience. That is a hard lesson. A final century viewed through Enki's warning is not simply a countdown, it is a divided reality. Most people continue inside the ordinary time. One person begins living inside another time. A time ruled by preparation. While others plant, he gathers. While others repair doors, he seals planks. While others discuss festivals, he thinks of animals, grain, family, darkness, and the most terrible weight of being believed too late. The city nearby remains beautiful in its exhausted way. Lamps glow in courtyards. Women spread woven mats. A child sleeps with one hand curled around a small clay toy. Men return from canal work with mud up their legs. The smell of fish, smoke, and crushed herbs drifts through the lanes. None of these details are meaningless. They are exactly what is at stake. Enki's contradiction protects this ordinary tenderness, but only in fragments. He does not stop the decree. He does not persuade the assembly to forgive everyone. He does not turn storm into gentle rain. His wisdom moves through limits. It saves a thread, not the whole cloth. That may be why the story feels so anciently as an survival is not the same as rescue. The listener inside the hut rises before dawn. His face is pale with decision. The marsh is silver under a low sky. He touches the reed wall as if it has become a mouth, or a witness, or an accomplice. In the distance, Eridu's temple waits above the water, serene and unreachable. A god has spoken, but not enough to make the path easy. So the first plank is chosen, the first rope is tested, the first lie may already be forming for curious neighbours. The final century has become intimate now. It has entered wood grain, wet rope, sleepless thought, and the quiet terror of preparation. Somewhere in the marsh, Enki's water moves under the earth. It remembers the secret. Dust arrives first as a nuisance. You notice it on lips, eyelids, doorframes, and the rim of a water jar left uncovered too long. It gathers in the folds of wool. It films the leaves of the date palms. It settles on the backs of sheep until their coats look older than the animals themselves. No one calls it an omen at first. It is only dust, and dust is almost too ordinary to fear. The sun rises pale over the fields. The light has a dry edge, and the horizon looks rubbed thin. Farmers walk along irrigation channels with wooden tools across their shoulders. Their feet sink into cracked mud where water should have lingered. A canal supervisor crouches and presses his thumb into the bank. The clay breaks apart too easily. He says nothing, because silence is cheaper than panic, and officials have always loved cheap things. In southern Mesopotamia, agriculture depended on irrigation with astonishing precision. Records and archaeological studies confirm that canals, levees, field systems, and water management shaped daily survival. Research from institutions such as the University of Chicago and Harvard has explored how salinization, river shifts, and changing settlement patterns affected ancient Mesopotamian agriculture. The land could be generous, but never obedient. It asked for constant attention, then punished small mistakes with large consequences. You walk beside a field of barley, the stalks should be fuller, the heads should bend with weight. Instead, many stand light, brittle, and uncertain. A worker breaks one between finger and thumb. The grain is poor, not absent, not ruined. Not yet a famine that people will carve into memory, but poor enough to change the mood in every house that depends on it. That is how fear becomes social. It begins in a field, then moves into a kitchen, then into a market, then into the voice of someone arguing at dusk. The century of dust is not one long disaster. It is a chain of smaller disappointments, a little less grain, a little more debt, a little more salt in the soil, a little more suspicion between those who store food and those who need it. You enter a granary near the temple estate. The room smells of dry husk, warm clay, and mouse droppings. Workers carry baskets to be measured. The scribe stylus moves quickly, but his eyes pause over the numbers. Rations must be adjusted, labour crews must be fed, offerings must continue. The god's portion cannot simply vanish because the harvest is thin. Heaven has never been known for accepting budget cuts gracefully. Outside, a group of labourers waits in the heat. Their shoulders are whitened with dust. One man coughs into his hand. Another mutters that the officials always discover shortage only after filling their own storerooms. A guard hears him and looks away. Wisely. Hunger sharpens speech. It also sharpens punishment. A quirky tidbit from Mesopotamian daily life is that ration records sometimes show standardized payments in barley, oil, wool, and beer for workers. The ancient world could be strangely modern in its paperwork. You might imagine a tired labourer receiving his measured beer allowance and thinking, with complete seriousness, that civilization had better not collapse before he drinks it. Fair enough, priorities matter. Yet beneath this ordinary economy, prophecy gains flesh. The divine warning once seemed distant, held in mythic spaces and whispered instructions. Now the land itself appears to participate. The rivers hesitate, the soil changes taste. Fields shine with a pale crust in places where irrigation has left salt behind. You touch it with your fingers. It is beautiful in the cruel way a knife can catch light. Scholars still debate how directly environmental stress contributed to political instability in ancient Mesopotamia. Some emphasize climate shifts, water management, and salinization. Others warn against reducing complex societies to weather and soil alone, because warfare or trade to cause administration. An ideology also shaped collapse and transformation. The wiser view holds several causes together, even when that makes the story less tidy. History rarely collapses for one reason. It prefers a crowd. In a village outside the city, a mother waters a small herb patch with care, almost religious in its tenderness. The leaves smell sharp when crushed. Mint, coriander, and onion rise from the soil, stubborn and green against the dust. Her child asks why the big fields look tired. She tells him the river is sleeping. It is a gentle lie, and perhaps not entirely wrong. Ancient rivers often seem alive, moody, and insultingly independent. At noon, the heat becomes blunt. Men rest in strips of shade thrown by reed screens. Flies gather at the eyes of cattle. A canal gate creaks as it is lifted, releasing a slow brown sheet of water. Farmers watch with narrowed faces. Too much water brings rotten flood. Too little brings hunger. Water must arrive in the right amount, at the right time, through the right channels, under the right authority. Honestly, it is a miracle any city lasted more than a week. In the final century imagined through Sumerian memory. Dust is not merely weather, it is a thinning of trust. People begin to wonder whether the gods are displeased, whether the king is weak, whether neighbours are cheating, whether old rituals have failed, whether the world has quietly moved away from them. No one needs to announce the end when everyone can feel supplies tightening. A temple official orders repairs to a canal bank. Workers arrive before dawn with baskets, ropes, and wooden shovels. Their bodies move in rhythm, lifting wet mud, pressing it down, shaping a barrier against the river's moods. For hours there is only effort, breath, mud, and the slap of feet. The work is practical. It's also sacred. To mend a canal is to delay chaos with your back. The smell of wet earth rises, rich and almost hopeful. Then the wind shifts, bringing dry dust from the open plain. It coats the new mud before it is fully settled. One worker laughs bitterly, another spits. The supervisor says to keep moving. That is the oldest instruction in any difficult century. Keep moving. At sunset, the fields turn bronze. The city walls glow like old embers. Herds return slowly, raising powder from the road. In courtyards, families divide food with new caution. The largest portion goes where labour demands it. The smallest hand receives a little extra when no one is looking. Even scarcity cannot fully defeat tenderness. It only makes tenderness quieter. The dust continues. It enters sealed rooms, clings to tablets, dulls painted walls, and settles on offerings before they're carried inside. A priest wipes a bowl clean with visible irritation, because even the divine meal now requires housekeeping. Above the temple, the sky is colourless and immense, gives no explanation. And so the warning becomes breathable. It is in the throat, it is in the cracked field, it is in the scribe's altered ration, the farmer's silent glance, the child's question, the mother's careful pouring of water over herbs. The final century does not have to shout. It only has to make every ordinary day slightly harder than the one people expected. By night, dust lies on the city like a second skin. No one sleeps deeply. Clay waits beneath everything. You feel it first under your feet, cool in the shaded places and hard where the sun has baked it into pale crust. It lines the canal banks. It forms the bricks of houses, the bowls in kitchens, the tablets in archives, the figurines buried beneath thresholds, and the small lamps that hold flame against night. In Sumer, earth is not background, it is material, witness, and metaphor. You kneel near a patch of wet soil beside a canal. A potter has dug it out and piled it under a reed mat. His hands press into the lump, turning heaviness into shape. He knows exactly how much water to add, how long to knead, when to stop. Too dry, and the vessel cracks. Too wet, and it slumps like an official asked to do honest labour. Creation requires balance, which is always the troublesome part. The myths draw you deeper into this clay. In Mesopotamian traditions, human beings are fashioned from earthly substance, often joined with divine elements, breath, blood, or life-giving power, depending on the version. The details shift across Sumerian and Akkadian texts, but the theme remains powerful. Humanity is made, not merely born. People are shaped for a role within a cosmic household. Mainstream research confirms that ancient Mesopotamian creation stories often connect humanity with labour. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied myths in which humans are brought into existence to relieve divine beings of work. The idea is startling when heard without decoration. Humans are not created for leisure, glory, or private self-expression. They are made because someone must dig the canals. That gives the human body a strange dignity. It is humble clay, yet necessary. It is weak, yet central. It is temporary, yet entrusted with maintaining temples, fields, offerings, families, and songs. You look at the potter's hands and understand why ancient thought loved this image. A formed thing can serve, a formed thing can break. A formed thing can remember the pressure of the hand that shaped it. In a shaded workshop, workers make bricks from river mud mixed with chopped straw. They press the mixture into moulds, smooth the tops, and leave each brick in rows beneath the sun. One brick is nothing. Thousands become walls. Tens of thousands become platforms for temples. Cities are made by repetition, and so are bodies. Flesh is only another arrangement of borrowed earth, briefly warmed and made restless. This is the unsettling turn. If humans are workers made from clay, then the final century is not merely a punishment, it may be a recall. The makers look upon their creation and decide the tool has grown beyond its intended use. The worker has multiplied, shouted, desired, ruled, built, dreamed, and perhaps forgotten the terms of service. There it is again. That ancient management problem, but now with cosmic consequences. You walk through a labour camp near a canal project. Men and women carry baskets of wet earth on their backs. Their skin shines with sweat. Their breath comes in rough rhythm. A supervisor counts loads. A cook stirs a pot of barley gruel. Children bring water in smaller jars, trying to look important, which children have been doing since the first sunrise. The work is exhausting, but not meaningless. Without it, the city starved. Records confirm that Sumerian administration carefully tracked labour, rations, and production. Tablets list workers by category, grain distributions, wool allocations, and duties connected with temples or estates. This is the solid historical ground beneath the mythic image. The society that imagined humans as labourers for the gods also organised real human labour with astonishing detail. Myth and paperwork look at each other across the same courtyard. A quirky fringed tidbit appears in the little clay figurines sometimes found in ancient Mesopotamian contexts. Later magical practices use small figures to represent people, spirits, enemies, or protective forces. Modern imaginations have turned these figurines into all kinds of eerie theories, from cursed dolls to memory devices. Careful scholars remain cautious, of course. Still, a tiny clay body in the palm feels like a question someone forgot to finish. The creation of humans from clay also carries a quiet threat. What is made from mud can return to mud. What receives breath can lose breath. What is shaped can be reshaped, crushed, dissolved, or buried. The flood tradition becomes more terrifying through this lens because water does not simply kill. It unforms. It returns walls to sludge, roads to channels, graves to open earth, and bodies to the same substance from which they were imagined to rise. Scholars continue to debate the relationship between creation myths and actual social structures in early Mesopotamia. Some argue that myths naturalize labour systems by placing hierarchy in divine time. Others suggest they gave sacred meaning to necessary cooperation in an unforgiving environment. The debate remains open, and perhaps it should. A myth can comfort and control at the same time. Ancient stories were rarely kind enough to choose only one purpose. At dusk, you stand near the brick fields. Rows of newly moulded bricks stretch out in fading light, each one marked by fingers, reeds, or official seals. The smell is earthy and warm, almost human. A worker lifts one brick to test its firmness. It holds. Tomorrow it will be carried, stacked, plastered, and forgotten inside a wall. Much of civilization is made from things that vanish into structures. The same may be true of people in the tablets. A labourer receives barley. A woman appears in a ration list. A child is counted as part of a household. Their names may survive only once, pressed by a scribe who cared more about totals than tenderness. Yet each name was a life with heat, smell, fatigue, irritation, and small private hopes. Clay preserves them without understanding them. That is one of history's saddest gifts. Now the creation story feels less remote. You're not hearing abstract theology. You're watching a society describe itself. Humans dig because gods desire order. Humans build because cities require height against the plain. Humans sing because silence before the divine might be worse. Humans count because hunger must be divided before it becomes violence. The clay body is a working body, and its purpose is written into its posture. But purpose can become prison. If humanity exists to serve, what happens when humans begin serving themselves? They build larger walls, compete for prestige, hoard grain, seek glory in war, and place royal names on temples meant for divine honour. Perhaps the gods look down and see not workers, but rivals made from mud. Perhaps the final century begins when clay forgets that it is clay. The potter's kiln glows in the evening like a small red cave. Vessels harden inside it, changed by heat into something more durable than the wet earth from which they came. The potter listens for cracks. He knows some pieces will fail. He also knows failure is part of making. You wonder whether the gods in these myths know the same thing, or whether they expect their creations to remain obedient forever. Night settles over the canal. The wet clay cools again. A child presses his hand into a leftover lump and laughs at the print it leaves. 5 fingers, small and perfect, vanish when the potter folds the clay back into itself. The mark was real, then it was gone. Noise rises from the city long before dawn. You hear it through woven doors, cross courtyards, along alleys still dark with sleeping heat. A rooster calls from a rooftop. A donkey answers with less elegance. Clay jars knock together near a well, somewhere. A mother whispers sharply to a child who has chosen the sacred hour before sunrise to become extremely awake. Human life begins early, and it rarely begins quietly. At first, the sound feels comforting. It means the city lives. It means bread will be baked, fires will be lit, canals will be opened, and markets will fill with bargaining voices. A silent city would be worse, and a silent city would mean plague, conquest, abandonment, or the kind of peace no one wants to explain. But in the old Mesopotamian flood traditions, human sound becomes troubling. The noise of humanity reaches the divine world. It disturbs rest. It irritates powers who once expected service, order, and offerings, not endless clamour. You pause beside a wall and listen again. The city does not sound wicked. It sounds alive. That is what makes the accusation so strange. Mainstream scholarship confirms that the theme of human noise appears clearly in later Mesopotamian flood literature, especially in traditions where the gods complain that humans have grown too numerous and loud. Scholars from major institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have treated this motif as one of the most revealing features of ancient ideas about divine and human tension. The story does not begin with murder or rebellion, it begins with disturbance. You move into the market as morning opens. The first sellers have spread mats on the ground, onions, dates, dried fish, wool, jars, knives, beads, and bread appear in rough abundance. A merchant praises his own goods with impressive confidence, which is to say, with almost no respect for truth. Another man objects to the price of oil, as if personally betrayed by the universe. 2 women compare cloth with the quiet severity of judges. The sound thickens. It has layers. Wooden wheels creak, reeds crack underfoot, goats complain, potters call to apprentices, water carriers shout warnings before pushing through crowds. A blind singer begins a hymn near a temple gate. his voice weaving divine names through the dust. A child laughs, then trips, then cries with great commitment. Life fills every space it is given. In the final century, this noise begins to feel like evidence, not to humans, who need it, but to the powers in the stories. The city has become too successful at being human. Its hunger is organized. Its work is endless. Its rituals are loud. Its population presses outward. Its needs multiply. Perhaps the gods expected a manageable workforce, not a restless species with festivals, lawsuits, love songs, and excellent complaints about ration sizes. There is a dark little joke hiding there. Creation comes with maintenance. A temple singer climbs the steps for the morning hymn. Her voice is trained and steady. Behind her, attendants carry offerings of bread, beer, dates, and meat. The doors of the shrine open, releasing a scent of incense, lamp smoke, and old wood. To worshippers below, this sound is reverence. To a weary god in myth, perhaps it is another interruption. Even devotion can become noisy when repeated by thousands of mouths. A quirky tidbit from Mesopotamian life is that ancient complaints could be wonderfully familiar. Letters and legal records from later Mesopotamia preserve irritation over poor goods, delayed payments, family disputes, and unreliable people. Humanity has always been talented at turning existence into customer service. The clay tablets sometimes feel less like distant antiquity and more like a neighbour arguing through a wall. Yet the deeper issue is not mere volume. Noise means presence. Noise means multiplication. Noise means the human world has become too dense to ignore. Every hammer strike says, we are building. Every argument says, we have claims. Every lullaby says, we continue. Every lament says, our pain demands witness. The gods may wish for quiet, but human beings announce themselves by living. Scholars continue to debate how the noise motif should be understood. Some read it as a mythic explanation for population pressure and social strain in early urban environments. Others see it as a theological reflection on the burden humans place upon cosmic order. Another view treats it as ancient humour turned tragic, where the gods resemble exhausted landlords above a very crowded house. Each interpretation catches part of the sound, but not all of it. You pass into a residential quarter where the noise changes shape. Here it is lower, more intimate. A grinding stone turns in a courtyard. A woman hums while crushing grain. An older man coughs from behind a reed screen. Someone pours water into a basin, and the splash feels briefly clean. A young couple quarrels in whispers that are not whispers at all. Privacy in a mud brick city is mostly a charming theory. The walls hold heat and secrets poorly. In this closeness, you understand how early cities transformed human existence. Villages have noise, but cities gather it, concentrate it, and send it upward. Thousands of people eat, work, sleep, desire, worship, cheat, mourn, and celebrate within walls. The city becomes a living instrument, played by every hand at once. No wonder ancient storytellers imagined heaven hearing it. Near the canal, labour crews begin repairing a damaged bank. Their foreman calls orders. Mud slaps into baskets. Feet sink and pull free with wet sounds. Workers sing to keep rhythm, not because they're cheerful, but because rhythm makes heavy labour possible. Their song is rough and repetitive. It turns exhaustion into shared time. Without such noise, the work would feel endless. The final century takes this ordinary music and darkens it. What humans need for survival may be what condemns them in divine ears. The same songs that hold labour together become part of the clamour. The same cries that prove children are alive become another sign of human increase. The same market noise that feeds households becomes, from above, a rising storm of need. This is not fair. Ancient myth is not always fair. By midday, the city roars beneath the white sky. Heat presses sound downward, trapping it in streets. The temple courtyards ring with steps and chanting. Merchants shout over animals. Officials call names from tablets. A bronze tool falls on stone with a sharp note that makes several people turn. You feel the human world as vibration, as pulse, as a restless beating against the flat land. Then wait for one breath. You imagine the divine height. The sounds blur together. No single mother or worker, to child or old man remains distinct. Humanity becomes a murmur, then a rumble, then an unbearable sea. From such distance the compassion may fail. Numbers replace faces. Noise replaces lives. That may be the most frightening transformation in the record. At twilight the city softens. Families retreat indoors, animals settle. The market empties into scattered refuse and fading footsteps. Smoke rises from evening meals. A lullaby drifts from a roof, tender enough to make the whole accusation seem cruel. How could this be too much? How could the sound of being alive become a reason for ending life? The stars appear above the rooftops, cold and patient, somewhere in mythic distance. The gods hear what humans cannot stop making: breath, work, hunger, prayer, laughter, grief. The final century is carried upward not by one scream, but by millions of ordinary sounds woven together. The city quiets. Heaven does not. The first broken covenant is not announced in public. It begins in small emissions, hidden in the space between duty and convenience. You stand near a temple entrance at dawn, where the stone threshold is cool beneath bare feet, and the smell of incense still clings to the air. The courtyard has been swept. The water vessels are ready. The singers wait with lowered eyes. Everything appears correct, which is often how the disorder prefers to arrive. A priest studies the offering table with a face trained to reveal nothing. Bread sits in neat rows. Dates glisten in a bowl. Beer has been poured into a polished vessel. A portion of meat rests near the lamp flame. The arrangement is beautiful, but a little thinner than it used to be. A smaller loaf has replaced the larger one. The oil has been stretched. Someone has made a practical decision and wrapped it in ritual silence. The gods, one suspects, notice accounting tricks. In Sumerian life, temples were not merely places of prayer when mythologies. They were economic centers, landholders, employers, storehouses, and ceremonial hearts of the city. Records confirm that temple households controlled goods, organized labor, and supported cultic service through offerings and administration. Scholars at institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Chicago have shown how deeply religious practice and economic structure were intertwined. To neglect a temple was not only immischious, it could disturb the machinery of the city. The covenant between humans and gods is never written as a modern contract, with neat clauses and bored witnesses. It is lived through food, labour, song, construction, purity, royal obedience, and constant repair. Humans receive existence, fields, kingship, fertility, and order. The gods receive service, honour, offerings, and a world that continues according to sacred pattern. This arrangement is fragile because every part of it requires repetition, and repetition gets expensive. You pass into a chamber where junior priests prepare vessels for washing. One scrubs too quickly and misses a stain near the rim. Another notices, hesitates, then says nothing. The day is already full. The supervisor is irritable. The grain delivery was late. There are always reasons. That is how covenant breaks most believably, not through a villain laughing in the shadows, but through tired people making small allowances. Outside the temple or precinct, the king's builders are raising a new wall. Mud brick rises course by course under the hands of labourers. The king wants his name stamped on bricks, his image carved into memory. his power visible from the road. Official inscriptions from Mesopotamia often present rulers as builders, restorers, and servants of the gods. That is the respectable version, yet ambition can wear piety like a clean robe over dirty knees. The ruler offers gifts to the temple, but he also takes from it. He claims divine favour, but he also uses that favour to demand obedience. He repairs sacred buildings, but he also expands his own glory through them. In this tension, the covenant becomes harder to read. Is the king serving the god, or using the god as a splendid signature? Ancient politics had a talent for looking holy when it was simply hungry. A quirky tidbit from Mesopotamian religion is that divine statues could be dressed, washed, perfumed, fed, and carried in procession. The god's image had a daily schedule more refined than most exhausted workers could dream of. One can imagine a labourer watching fine garments enter the shrine and thinking, very quietly, that heaven had excellent laundry service. The point to Chung, however, is not mockery. The statue was treated as the living presence of the deity within ritual life. If the image was neglected, damaged, stolen, or improperly served, the entire city could feel exposed. Divine presence had to be maintained through care, without care. Absence crept closer. Scholars continue to debate how ordinary people understood temple ritual compared with priests and royal elites. Some argue that formal cult practice was largely managed by specialists, while common people engaged through festivals, household devotions, vows, and local customs. Others stress that temple religion shaped the emotional and economic life of everyone, even those who rarely entered inner sacred spaces. The debate remains alive because belief leaves uneven traces. Clay preserves rations better than private fear. You move toward a household shrine in a narrow lane. A small lamp burns near a figurine. The room smells of wool, lentils, smoke, and warm bodies. A woman places a little food beside the flame. Not much, only what the household can spare. Her gesture is simple, almost invisible beside grand temple rites, but it carries the same logic. Give, remember, ask, continue. Yet even here, strange shows. The offering is smaller, the prayer is shorter. The woman glances toward the sleeping children and calculates what remains for morning. Hunger changes theology. It makes generosity difficult. It makes ritual feel like negotiation with an empty jar. In the final century, broken covenant spreads through these pressures. Temples receive less than they require, or perhaps less than priests expect. King sees more in the name of stability. Workers resent obligations that no longer promise protection. Farmers wonder why the gods need food while fields fail. Ritual continues, but a hollow note enters the chant. The form remains, while confidence thins. That hollow note matters. A city can keep performing belief after trust begins to crack. It can still process, sing, pour, bow, and recite. The old words may be spoken perfectly while the heart behind them becomes tired. In the tablets and myths, divine anger often follows human failure, but human failure is rarely simple. People neglect gods for greed, yes, but also from exhaustion, fear, confusion, and shortage. The covenant breaks because life presses against it from every side. At the palace, officials debate emergency measures. Grain must be redirected, labour must be intensified, temples must cooperate. The king's advisor speaks carefully because advisors prefer surviving their own sentences. He suggests postponing one festival expenditure and increasing canal work instead. The priestly representative stiffens. A festival postponed is not just a party delayed, it is a scheduled act of cosmic maintenance. The room grows still. Here the final century becomes political. The trigger may not be one single sin, but a cumulative failure of alignment. King, temple, field, river, household, and divine expectation begin pulling in different directions. The old system depended on synchronized duties. When those duties compete, every choice becomes a betrayal of something sacred. The smell of wax smoke thickens in the palace chamber. A fly circles a bowl of dates. Outside, petitioners wait in the heat, each carrying a private emergency. The officials speak of supply, labour, tribute, and ritual. They do not speak of the end of humanity. They speak like administrators, which is often how large endings learn to disguise themselves. A council decree proves nothing eternal, but it can reveal satiety under pressure. Ancient records of land grants, temple management, rationing, and royal building show how much effort was needed to hold order together. The Sumerians did not live in a soft mythic mist. They lived inside systems of obligation that could tighten like rope. When the rope frays, everyone feels it differently. By night, the temple offering is carried inside, the hymn is sung, the lamps are trimmed. From the outside, the covenant appears intact. A passerby sees the glow and feels reassured. The gods are being fed. The rites continue. The city still knows its place. But inside the storeroom, the shelves are less full. In the fields, the soil is less kind. In the palace, ambition has learned sacred language. In the houses, prayers have grown more anxious. The first broken covenant is not a shattering sound, as it is a series of quiet substitutions, each one reasonable, each one dangerous. You stand at the threshold as the shrine doors close. The latch falls with a soft iron note. Beyond it, the god receives the offering, or perhaps the god measures the absence inside it. The lamp burns lower. No one speaks. Dreams arrive without knocking. You lie in a room where the air is close, warmed by sleeping bodies, stored grain, and the faint sour smell of yesterday's beer. A reed mat presses its pattern against your shoulder. Outside, a dog shifts in the dust, somewhere far away. A nightbird cries over the canal, then the sound disappears into the dark. The dream begins with water, as many dreams do in a country that survives by measuring it. At first, the water is clear and harmless, slipping over your ankles like a blessing. Then it deepens. It enters the street. It lifts clay jars from doorways and carries them gently away, which is almost worse than violence. Gentle destruction feels personal. It suggests the world knows exactly what it is doing. In Mesopotamian tradition, dreams could matter. They might bring messages from gods, warnings from the dead, or signs requiring interpretation. Records and literary texts confirm that dreams held religious and political significance across ancient Mesopotamia. Scholars at universities such as Yale and Chicago have studied dream reports, omen collections, and royal inscriptions where nighttime visions guide action, confirm authority, or trouble the mind of a ruler. So sleep was not empty. It was another doorway. You wake before dawn with your throat dry. The room is still dark, but the dream remains brighter than the waking world. Your hand reaches for the floor, checking without reason that it is solid. It is solid. Of course it is solid. That does not comfort you as much as it should. In a palace chamber, a king wakes from a different dream. He has seen a statue sweating, or a river flowing backward, or a throne sinking into mud. His servants hurry when he calls, because royal fear becomes everyone's schedule. Lamps are lit. Water is brought. A priest is summoned with the expression of a man who hoped for a quieter morning. Kings may command armies, but a bad dream can make them look like children listening at a locked door. The interpreter listens carefully. He does not laugh. Nobody survives long at court by laughing at royal nightmares. He asks what colour the water was, what direction it's moved, whether birds appeared, whether the king stood alone, whether a voice spoke, whether the dream ended in darkness or light. Each detail becomes a possible sign. The dream must be sorted before fear sorts itself into policy. A quirky tidbit from ancient dream interpretation is that not every strange vision was automatically grand. Some dreams required ritual response. Others might be dismissed as the product of food, illness, anxiety, or ordinary confusion. Even ancient specialists knew that the sleeping mind could be messy. In other words, sometimes a terrifying dream might mean the gods are warning you, and sometimes it might mean dinner was a mistake. Still, in the final century, dreams begin to gather force. They do not remain private. A priest dreams of a temple door that will not open. A canal worker dreams of fish swimming through the grain store. A mother dreams of her child speaking with an old man whose face is covered in clay. A singer dreams that her hymn continues after her mouth has closed. Each dream is small by itself. Together, they darken the air. The city does not store arms. Dreams rarely stop cities. Markets open, bread bakes, donkeys complain, officials pretend confidence with admirable persistence. Yet people begin sharing night visions in whispers near wells and grinding stones. One person's fear makes another person remember something similar. Soon the dream belongs not to one sleeper, but to the neighbourhood. Anxiety is excellent at forming committees. Among scholars, debate remains open over how dream accounts in Mesopotamian texts should be read. Some interpret them as literary devices used to authorize royal decisions or sacred actions. Others suggest they reflect a lived religious practice, where dreams were genuinely treated as contact with divine or ancestral powers. A careful listener can hold both possibilities. Ancient writing can turn real fear into formal story, then carry it forward for centuries. You visit a temple specialist who keeps tablets near his sleeping room. The shelves smell of clay, wool cover, and old smoke. He has recorded omens, ritual instructions, and remembered cases from earlier generations. He knows that a dream is not useful until it is placed inside a pattern. A raw dream is only fog, an interpreted dream becomes a road, though not always one you wish to travel. A young woman comes to him at sunrise. Her hands are reddened from washing. She has dreamed that the city wall was made of bread, and birds were eating it. The image is absurd, almost funny, until she speaks it aloud. Then the priest's face changes. A wall that can be eaten is no wall at all. Bread means food, but also offering. Birds may be messengers, thieves, or souls, depending on the story one trusts. The dream becomes a knot. He gives her instructions. Burn a little incense. Pour clean water. Speak a prayer at the household lamp. Do not repeat the dream to anyone careless. Ancient specialists were very aware that words can spread fear faster than sickness. A dream told badly becomes another disaster. In the palace, the king orders a ritual cleansing. Water is drawn from a pure source. Priests recite words meant to loosen evil signs from the body. A substitute offering is prepared. The king stands still while smoke rises around him. For a moment, he is less ruler than patient, less shepherd than frightened animal under ceremonial hands. Power does not protect a man from what he sees in sleep. The final century enters the mind this way. It slips past guards, walls, seals, and titles. It visits the poor and the royal without asking permission. It makes shepherds wake sweating beside their flocks. It makes scribes press too hard into the clay the next morning. It makes women pause while pouring water, because the sound resembles something heard in darkness. Dreams do not need proof, they need repetition. In a small house near the canal, an old man dreams of a reed wall speaking. The voice is not loud, It tells him to listen to what is hidden inside ordinary things. He wakes with tears in his beard and cannot explain why. Perhaps it is only age, perhaps it is grief, perhaps the mind, after many seasons of dust and thin harvests, has begun making profits out of sleep. This is where the human role becomes tender and troubling. Humans are not only workers, singers, builders, and noisy creatures beneath heaven. They are receivers. They absorb signs into fragile bodies. Their minds become clay tablets during the night, marked by images they did not choose. Some marks fade by breakfast, others harden. At midday, the dreamers look ordinary again. The woman haggles over onions. The king hears petitions. The priest checks the lamps. The canal worker repairs a bank with mud up to his knees. No one can see the images carried inside them. A city is full of invisible tablets, each one written in sleep and sealed behind the eyes. Evening returns with a softness that feels almost merciful. Families lie down under roofs of reed and clay. The air cools slowly. A mother tells a child that dreams are only shadows passing through the mind. She says this gently, because children require comfort and adults require it even more. But outside, the canal reflects the stars. Inside, sleepers turn, and somewhere beneath ordinary breathing, the next message waits for dawn. The event beneath the waters does not begin as a wall. It begins with pressure. You feel it in the air before you see anything change. A heaviness against the skin, a closeness that makes every breath seem borrowed. The sky lowers over the plain, not dark yet, but colourless and waiting. Birds fly inland from the marshes. Dogs refuse shade and pace near doorways. People notice, then pretend not to notice. At the river banks of Uruk, the water moves with unusual silence. That is the first wrongness. Rivers in Sumer usually speak in small voices, licking mud, pulling reeds, tapping boats against posts. Now the channel seems swollen with intention. Its surface is smooth in places where it should wrinkle. A fisherman leans on his pole and watches a line of foam drift past like a torn strip of linen. In the tablets and later flood traditions, the trigger appears in several forms. It can be a divine decree. Great storm, rising waters, or the hidden result of a council whose decision falls upon earth. The event is remembered as flood because water is the ancient world's most complete unmaker. It enters houses without asking, lifts the dead and living together, erases field boundaries, dissolves walls, and returns cities to mud. Records from Mesopotamia confirm that flood traditions were central to ancient storytelling, appearing in Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian forms. Archaeologists have also found evidence of ancient flooding at some Mesopotamian sites, though not one single universal flood across all cities. Scholars at institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania, Oxford, and Chicago continue to distinguish carefully between regional flood events, literary tradition, and theological meaning. The clay speaks, but never in only one voice. You walk through Uruk back in the morning before the storm breaks. The city smells of damp reeds, smoke, and restless animals. This place carries special weight in the flood traditions because it is linked with a survivor figure in several versions. Its streets are not empty. People still mend roofs, sort grain, scold children, and bargain over rope. Disaster, annoyingly, does not always announce itself early enough for people to cancel errands. A boat builder works near a yard stacked with timber. Good wood is precious in southern Mesopotamia, where reeds and mud are easier to find than great trees. Every plank has travelled through hands, trade routes, and decisions. The builder runs his palm over a beam and listens to the grain under his skin. In a land of clay and reed, wood can feel almost like treasure. The air thickens. A gust moves through the street, lifting dust in a low sheet. Then another gust follows, colder and sharper. Women gather laundry from lines. A man shouts for his sons to bring the animals closer. The sky to the west has turned the colour of bruised iron. Thunder speaks once, far away, with the calm authority of something that has no need to repeat itself. A quirky tidbit from ancient flood stories is how practical some versions become. They may include dimensions, materials, pitch, decks, or loading instructions, as if cosmic disaster requires a construction manual. It is a startling blend of myth and carpentry. The gods may decree ruin, but someone still has to solve drainage, and where exactly to put the goats. Truly, civilization never escapes logistics. Now the trigger shifts from sign to event. For years, perhaps, people have felt tension in dust, dreams, omens, and fail against trust. Yet tension is survivable. People can live inside unease for a very long time. What they cannot survive is the moment the world changes its rules. Ground becomes unsafe, shelter becomes a trap, water, once guided through canals, no longer accepts guidance. The first rain falls as large drops that strike dust and release a smell almost sweet. Children laugh and lift their faces. Adults look at the sky. It can be blessing in a dry season. Rain can also be insult if it arrives too hard, too late, and too long. The drops multiply, striking roofs, jars, animals' shoulders. The street darkens, mud forms between bricks, the city exhales, then tightens. Scholars still debate whether flood narratives preserve memories of catastrophic local floods, symbolic renewal after social collapse, or a mythic explanation for human vulnerability under divine authority. Some researchers emphasize river behavior and sediment layers. Others focus on literary connections among Mesopotamian texts. The strongest reading may allow the event to be both memory and meaning, because ancient people rarely separated land from story as sharply as the modern minds do. By afternoon, the canals are roaring, water slams against banks repaired too many times. Workers run with baskets and tools, shouting instructions no one can fully hear. The river has turned brown and muscular, carrying branches, reeds, dead fish, and pieces of someone's fence. A gate fails with a sound like a giant jar cracking. Men scramble back as water pours through with terrifying relief. The city changes from place to obstacle. Streets become channels. Courtyards become basins. Doorways swallow water. The lower rooms fill first. Jars float and tip. A loom collapses. A child's toy drifts past the threshold, turning slowly in the current. That small object hurts more than the broken wall. Large destruction can feel unreal. Small losses explain it. On the higher ground, people gather near temples and raised platforms. Animals bawl in fear. Priests shout prayers into wind. A king's official tries to organize movement, but authority weakens when the ground under authority disappears. A soldier can guard a gate. He cannot arrest a river. Though, one imagines, some official probably considered issuing the order. Night arrives early under storm clouds. Rain hits so hard that surfaces vanish into sound. Lightning opens the city in white flashes, showing faces slick with water. Mouths open, hands gripping ropes, bundles, children, doorframes, anything that might hold. Then darkness drops again. Thunder folds over the roofs. The river enters the city like a verdict being read aloud. In the hidden timeline, this is the event that triggers the unmaking. It may be natural flood interpreted as divine judgment. It may be mythic flood expressing moral disorder. It may be both, braided together so tightly that separating them would damage the story. To the person standing waist-deep in rising water, the difference matters less than scholars might wish. The world is ending where the body stands, yet beneath the terror lies a grim pattern. The waters do not create the crisis. They reveal it. They show which walls were weak, which stores were guarded, which leaders were trusted, which rituals still comforted, which families stayed together, which strangers reached for one another in the dark. Disaster is never only an event, it is an examination. Near midnight, the plain is no longer a plain. It is a moving black surface broken by roofs, trees, temple tops, and the cries of animals. The river has escaped its name, the canal has become everywhere, and clay walls soften, foundations loosen. The city that depended on shaped mud begins returning to shapeless mud. You hear rain, water, wind, and human voices dissolving into one another. The event beneath the waters has risen. It is no longer beneath anything. It carries the century away. The survivor does not look like a hero at first. He looks tired. His clothes cling with river damp and resin smell. His hands are rough from rope, timber, and sleepless labour. His eyes have the fixed brightness of someone who knows too much and has not yet decided whether knowledge is mercy or punishment. Around him, the boat waits like an impossible animal, sealed against a world that has stopped making sense. In Sumerian tradition, the survivor is often named Ziusudra, a king of Uruk who receives divine favour and endures the flood. In later Akkadian tradition, related figures appear under different names, carrying the same unbearable pattern. A warning is received, a vessel is built, life is gathered inside. The waters rise. The survivor becomes not only a person rescued from death, but a container for memory itself. Mainstream research confirms that the Sumerian flood story survives only in fragmentary form, while later Mesopotamian versions preserve fuller narrative structures. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied how these traditions travelled, changed language, changed names, and still kept a recognisable core. The result feels like listening to one melody played on several ancient instruments, each cracked in a different place. You stand near the vessel as people stare from a distance. Some are silent, some whisper, some laugh too loudly because disbelief enjoys an audience. A boat of unusual size on uncertain ground invites ridicule, and ridicule is often fear-wearing borrowed teeth. A man asks whether Ziusudra plans to sail through the street. Another wonders if the gods have started issuing private building permits. Even at the edge of extinction, someone will make jokes. The air smells of pitch, wood shavings, wet rope, and animal breath. Crates are stacked. Grain sacks are lashed into place. Water jars roll unless wedged carefully. Birds flap inside woven cages. Sheep resist being moved with the firm conviction that all human plans are suspicious. Goats, naturally, behave as if they were personally consulted by chaos. The secret is not merely that a flood is coming. The secret is what must be preserved: seed grain, animals, kinship, craft knowledge, ritual, memory, the ability to begin again without pretending that beginning again is simple. Ziusudra carries a burden larger than survival, because a lone survivor without memory would be only a frightened man on water. He must become an archive that breathes. This is why the sealed secret is so troubling. The gods allow one thread to pass through destruction, yet the thread must pass through silence, isolation, and misunderstanding. The chosen figure cannot save the whole city. He cannot persuade every neighbour. He cannot turn divine warning into public policy. The final century narrows until it fits inside one vessel, one household, one desperate act of preparation. A quirky fringe tidbit follows Ziusudra through the modern imagination. Some have claimed that the flood vessel represents a coded survival chamber, a seed vault, or ancient disaster planning disguised as myth. Professional historians do not treat such claims as established, but the idea lingers because the story itself is already about preservation. It is not strange that modern minds translate an ark into emergency storage, We are still the same nervous species, only with better labels. Inside the boat, the light is dim and brown. The walls creak softly. You feel the tightness of stored life. There is the musk of animals, the sourness of fear, the dust of grain, the heavy sweetness of pitch, and the salt of sweat. Every object seems too important. Every jar must not break. Every rope must hold. Every living thing inside becomes a small argument against total loss. Scholars continue to debate whether Ziusudra should be understood as a memory of an early ruler, a mythic model of piety, or a literary figure shaped by scribal tradition. Some emphasize his royal role and divine reward. Others focus on his obedience, silence, and function as the bridge between destroyed and renewed worlds. The debate remains open because the fragments give us a figure half seen through water, never fully still. You imagine him before the door is sealed. He looks toward the city. Lamps flicker behind reed screens. Smoke bends in the wind. People still move through streets carrying bundles, calling names, arguing over where to go. The ordinary world has become unbearably precious because it is already leaving. He may want to shout. He may want to explain. He may know explanation would only create panic, anger, or disbelief. That is the cruelty of hidden knowledge. A child inside the vessel asks why everyone cannot come. No one answers quickly. How do you explain divine decree to a child, or limited space, or the horrifying mathematics of survival? An adult says the door must close soon. The child asks whether the city will still be there when morning comes. Someone adjusts a jar and pretends not to hear. The secret seals itself in gestures. A rope is tightened. A latch is set. A hand touches the inner wall. A prayer is spoken without confidence, which may be the most honest kind of prayer. Outside, rain begins again, soft at first, almost polite. Then the drops grow heavier. The roof drums beneath them. Animals stir, humans go quiet. Ziusudra is not saved from terror. He is saved into it. That distinction matters. The chosen survivor still hears the water. He still feels the vessels shift. He still imagines the faces outside. Divine favor does not make him comfortable. It makes him responsible. Somewhere in the dark, a god has given him life with grief fastened to it. The final century ends for most people as a force. For Ziusudra, it becomes a memory that must not be allowed to die. He will remember the dust before the rain, the strange dreams, the thinning offerings, the laughter near the boat, the last familiar roof line, the exact sound of the seal closing. Memory is not gentle. It stores what the heart would rather release. A temple tower vanishes behind sheets of rain. The city lamps blur, then disappear. Water lifts the vessel with a slow, awful tenderness. For a moment it scrapes against something below. Perhaps a wall, perhaps a roof beam, perhaps the last edge of the old world. Then it floats free.
Inside there, no one matters to me.
The secret is sealed with them, pressed tighter than any tablet. It is the knowledge that humanity can be judged, nearly erased, and yet carried onward by a fragile remnant. It is the knowledge that survival may be less a victory than a duty laid on trembling hands. The boat turns in darkness. The waters take it. Ziusudra listens and remembers. 7 days can become longer than a lifetime. You understand this only when the world outside has no horizon, no road, no field edge, no courtyard wall, no sound that belongs entirely to human beings. There is only storm, there is only water striking wood, there is only the groan of a vessel carrying breath across a surface that should have been land. Inside, the darkness has weight. It presses against eyes, shoulders, ribs, and thought. Lamps are used with care because flame is now a fragile guest. The air is thick with animal heat, damp wool, grain dust, resin, fear. and the sour human smell of too many bodies waiting in one closed space, somewhere nearby. A sheep shifts and knocks its hoof against a plank. Everyone hears it. Everyone listens too hard. The first day is confusion. People count objects again and again, as if counting can prove reality is not broken. Water jars, grain sacks, tools, blankets, ropes, children. The list must remain complete. Outside, and rain and a flood merge into a single endless voice. The vessel rises and falls, sometimes sharply, sometimes with a slow ebbs that turns the stomach. Someone whispers a prayer, someone else corrects a forgotten line, because even terror apparently has editors. Flood accounts in Mesopotamian tradition often describe a limited but intense period of storm, darkness, and divine violence. Later versions speak of days and nights in which wind, rain, and flood overwhelm the inhabited world. Researchers at universities such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have examined how these time spans shape the story, turning disaster into ritual duration. The number of days is not casual, it gives terror a frame. The second day belongs to sound. The storm finds every seam in the mind. Water hammers the roof. Wind drags its nails along the sides. Floating debris strikes the hull with dull, sudden blows. A jar breaks, and the sharp sound makes a child scream. No one scolds him. Adults would scream too, if dignity did not keep making unreasonable demands. You sit near the inner wall, one palm flat against the wood. Through it, the flood feels alive, not like a beast exactly, but like a moving world with no interest in you. That indifference is worse than hatred. Hatred at least notices its victim. Water simply arrives, enters, lifts, dissolves, and continues. A city may have laws, walls, ranks, and ceremonies. Floodwater does not ask for credentials. By the third day, memory starts attacking. People begin recalling things they cannot save. A doorway with a chipped edge, a mother's loom, a painted jar left on a shelf, the smell of bread at dawn, a neighbour's laugh, a small debt that suddenly seems too precious to have remained unpaid. Loss becomes detailed. The mind does not mourn civilization in general, it mourns the cup that fit perfectly in one hand. A quirky tidbit in ancient catastrophe stories is the persistence of animals. They are never merely background. They bleat, flap, stamp, panic, stink, eat soon, and survive with tremendous inconvenience. This is oddly comforting. While humans wonder about divine judgment, goats continue being goats. Their complete lack of theology is almost admirable. The fourth day brings exhaustion. No one sleeps deeply. The vessel rocks in rhythms that never settle long enough to trust. Water must be rationed. Though water surrounds them in unimaginable abundance, that irony is not lost on anyone. A man laughs when he realizes it, then stops because the laugh sounds wrong in the dark. A woman holds her child and hums without melody, only vibration, because words have become too large. The storm outside begins to feel less like weather and more like erasure. In the old mud brick cities, walls would be softening now, roofs would slump, grain stores would split, the carefully measured borders between field and canal would vanish under moving brown water. Administrative tablets, if unfired, would melt back toward blank clay. Names, numbers, debts, and offerings could dissolve together. Civilization, that proud arrangement of marks and walls, is terribly vulnerable to moisture. A humbling design flaw, really. Scholars continue to debate whether the flood's duration in Mesopotamian literature reflects ritual symbolism, memory of intense regional storms, or narrative compression of longer crises. Some view the days as a literary device that makes cosmic destruction graspable. Others argue that such details may preserve echoes of real flood experience reshaped through sacred storytelling. Both views recognize the same thing. The story needs time for fear to become knowledge. On the fifth day, silence appears in pieces. Not true silence, not yet. The rain weakens for a while, and the change is so sudden that everyone freezes. Without the drumming roof, other sounds emerge: breathing, rope creak, a bird scratching inside its cage, someone swallowing. Then thunder returns, and the vessel tilts hard enough to send a basket sliding. The storm resumes its ownership of the world. You imagine what lies beneath: temple courts filled with water, market stalls overturned, clay ovens crumbling, reed fences tangled in trees, dead fires, floating doors, the high walls of Uruk stained and battered. The sacred platforms standing above flood like islands of memory. If they stand at all, the world is not merely covered, it is being edited. The sixth day is when hope becomes dangerous. People begin asking whether the worst has passed. They do not ask loudly. Hope spoken too clearly might offend whatever remains in charge. A man opens a small covered space to check the weather and receives only wind, spray, and darkness. He closes it quickly. The air inside changes for a moment, fresh and cold, and everyone inhales as though tasting another life. In this confined world, humanity is reduced to essentials: breath, warmth, food, water, touch, memory, the need to keep children calm, the need to keep animals alive, the need not to turn fear against one another. There is no market, palace, court, or public praise. Status shrinks in the dark. A king and a servant both need dry bedding. A priest and a herdsman both listen for leaks. That is one secret of unmaking. The seventh day does not arrive with certainty. It arrives through change. The rain thins. The vessel no longer rises with the same violence. The wind still moves, but its rage has weakened into long, tired breaths. People wait for disaster to resume, because the body does not trust mercy at once. The mind keeps bracing even after the blow has passed. A child asks whether the ground is under them. An adult answers yes, though no one knows. The answer is not information, it is shelter. Sometimes the first rebuilding of the world is a sentence spoken kindly without evidence. At last, there is a sound that does not belong to storm. Something brushes the hull, soft and scraping. A branch, perhaps, a roof beam, a piece of a city carried into nameless water. Everyone listens. The darkness feels full of ghosts, though no ghost speaks. 7 days of unmaking have not ended humanity. They have changed what the word humanity can mean. It is no longer the roar of crowded cities or the confidence of kings. It is a cluster of living bodies in a sealed vessel. Trembling over the drowned face of the world, it is smaller than pride expected. It is also harder to extinguish. In the fading storm, someone begins to weep without sound. Another hand reaches for theirs. No hymn rises yet. No celebration breaks open, only breath continues, slow and stunned, inside the damp wooden dark. Outside, the waters move over everything. Inside, memory remains awake. Mud receives the first footstep. You feel it pull at the soul, soft and cold, as if the earth itself is reluctant to let anyone walk upon it again. The air is wide, raw, and strangely clean. It smells of wet clay, broken reeds, drowned furs, and things newly exposed to light. Above, the sky has opened into a pale grey dome, exhausted by its own violence. No bird sings at first. The vessel rests at an angle, lodged against ground that may be a ridge, a roof, a bank, or the shoulder of some altered hill. Everything familiar has lost its certainty, distance looks wrong, the horizon has moved, the world has become a vast sheet of water interrupted by debris, treetops, temple remains, and patches of mud shining like dark skin under morning light. Ziusudra stands in the doorway and does not step down immediately. That hesitation matters. Survival is one thing inside a sealed vessel. It is another thing when the door opens and the air asks what you intend to do with it. Behind him, the living crowd close, animals restless, humans silent, every face turned toward the wounded earth. Flood traditions often dwell on the moment when the waters recede and the survivor emerges into a changed world. In Mesopotamian stories, the aftermath includes offerings, divine response, and the restoration of life under altered terms. Scholars at institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied this scene as a passage from destruction into renewed order. It is not a simple happy ending, it is the beginning of responsibility. You step onto the mud, it holds barely. The first task is not grand, it is practical. Check the ground, lead out animals slowly. Find dry places, count the living car, inspect water jars, protect seed grain. Look for wood that can still burn. The world may have ended, but someone still has to manage the sheep. Catastrophe, with its usual lack of manners, leaves chores everywhere. A goat leaps down too quickly and slides, legs splayed in offended dignity. For one tiny moment, the survivors almost laugh. The sound catches in their throats, not because it is wrong, but because laughter feels like an unfamiliar tool. They have carried fear for so long that ordinary amusement seems indecent. Still, the goat shakes itself and glares at everyone, and life briefly remembers its absurd side. The mud stretches beyond them, marked by strange currents and stranded objects. A door lies half buried. A clay jar sits upright as if placed there by careful hands. A child recognizes a painted pattern from someone's house and begins crying. No one tells the child to stop. Grief must be allowed to find its own shoreline. In Sumerian and later Mesopotamian flood traditions, the survivor makes an offering after emerging. Smoke rises into the cleansed and emptied air. The act is small beside the scale of destruction, yet it is enormous in meaning. To offer is to declare that relationship still exists. It says the world remains addressable. It says the gods, however terrifying, have not become unreachable silence. Mainstream research confirms that sacrifice and offering were central to Mesopotamian religious practice, binding households, temples, rulers, and divine beings into repeated exchange. The offering after the flood is not a decorative detail, it restores communication. Scholars have long noted that the divine response to the scent of sacrifice in later version shows how deeply the gods remain connected to human ritual, even immortals. Apparently, but notice dinner. That old joke feels uncomfortable now. The survivors gather dry fragments of wood, reeds, and pitch scraped from stores. A small fire is coaxed into flame, and smoke rises slowly, uncertain at first, then straighter as the air stills. Its smell is sharp and clean, cutting through the wet odour of flood. People watch it climb. A column of smoke has never seemed so fragile or so bold. Ziusudra places the offering with hands that tremble, perhaps from exhaustion, perhaps from reverence, perhaps from anger held too tightly to show. He has survived divine judgment, but survival does not erase the question of justice. Around him lie the remains of fields, houses, graves, and paths. What words can be spoken to powers who allowed this? What words can be withheld? when life itself may still depend on them. Scholars continue to debate whether the post-flood sacrifice should be understood primarily as reconciliation, appeasement, ritual restart, or a literary device showing the gods' dependence on human service. Some interpretations emphasize gratitude. Others detect a darker implication, that the gods destroyed too much and then responded to the loss of offerings. The scene is powerful because it allows devotion and accusation to share the same smoke. The animals step into the new world in clumsy procession. Sheep hesitate. Birds burst upward when released, startled by open air. Their wings flash against the pale sky. A dog runs in circles, stops, sniffs, and whines at nothing visible. The living do not understand the absence surrounding them. They know only movement, hunger, fear, and the pull of instinct toward continuation. Human beings move more slowly. They scan the horizon for recognizable signs, a temple top, a line of palms, a mound where a district once stood. Memory tries to match the world to itself and fails. That failure is a second disaster. The land remains, but the map inside the mind has drowned. You walk toward what used to be a field. The boundary stones are gone. The canal is no longer a canal, only a torn channel filled with silt and floating reeds. Salt shines in shallow pools. Dead fish lie where barley once grew, and the soil smells rich but also sour. It is fertile and ruined at the same time, which is a very ancient arrangement. The final century has emptied into this morning. It no longer belongs to prophecy, omen, dream, or decree. It is underfoot. It is in the mud that receives each step. It is in the offering smoke rising from a handful of survivors. It is in the impossible task of beginning again without pretending the old world can be recovered. A young survivor kneels and presses a hand into the wet ground. 5 fingers leave a mark. The print fills slowly with water. She watches it vanish, then presses again. This time she looks calmer. Perhaps she understands something no adult has managed to explain. A mark can disappear, and still the hand remains. Nearby, Ziusudra turns toward the fire. The smoke rises higher now, a thin grey thread between drowned earth and unreadable heaven. No clear answer comes. No voice descends to explain the dead. No divine apology breaks the air. Only the smoke continues upward, carrying grain, fat, grief, obedience, resentment, and the stubborn announcement that humans are still here. The world looks familiar only in pieces. Sky, mud, water, breath, views, these are enough to begin, though not enough to heal. The survivors stand together in the damp light, smaller than the silence around them, larger than extinction expected. When the waters recede, they do not return the past. They reveal the burden. The gods smell the smoke before Anbalisman understands what it means. You feel the scene open not on earth, but in that strange upper space where myth allows immortals to become almost human. The storm has passed. The waters lie heavy upon the world. The offering rises from a muddy remnant of land, thin and wavering, and the divine powers gather toward it with an eagerness that feels uncomfortable. The scent of sacrifice climbs through wet air. Burned grain, fat, smoke, fire returning after water to the survivors below. The offering is grief shaped into ritual. To the gods above, it may be proof that something essential has not been lost. The human world, nearly erased, still knows how to feed the heavens. That realization carries relief, but also shame. If gods can feel such a thing. In later Mesopotamian flood tradition, the gods respond strongly to the survivor's offering. The scene is famous because it shows divine beings drawn toward the sacrifice after the flood. Scholars at institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have studied this moment as one of the clearest signs that humans and gods remain mutually bound. Humanity serves the gods, but the gods also depend upon human ritual. That dependency changes everything. You are no longer watching a simple hierarchy. With gods above and humans below, the relationship is still unequal, terribly unequal, but not one-sided. Without humans, who maintains the temples, who sings the hymns, who pours the beer, who burns the offerings, who gives divine names a dwelling in sound, a world without humanity may be quieter. Yes, but it may also be emptier than heaven expected. There is a faintly awkward comedy in this, the divine assembly, having approved destruction because humans were noisy, now gathers around the first human offering like guests who regret cancelling dinner. It is not loud humour, it is the dry, sleepy kind that arrives when a sacred story admits that even gods may miscalculate. Very dignified, very embarrassing. Yet the regret is not merely about food. It is deeper than appetite. The gods in these traditions face the consequence of their own decree. They wish to remove disturbance, but nearly removed relationship. They wish to silence noise, but nearly silenced praise. They wish to end human excess, but nearly ended the very system through which divine order was mirrored on earth. This is the solemn turn. The flood does not only judge humanity, it exposes the gods. You imagine the divine council after the waters settle. Enlil, the great authority, hears that a human has survived. His anger may flare, because a decree has been breached. Another god has used wisdom like a hidden knife, cutting a passage through judgment. Enki, or Ea in later tradition, must answer for the loophole. The argument is not petty, it concerns the future shape of existence. Mainstream research confirms that Mesopotamian myths often present the gods as powerful but not morally simple. They can be wise, frightened, impulsive, merciful. They are hungry, majestic, and inconsistent. Scholars at major universities have noted that these stories do not create perfect beings in the later philosophical sense. They create divine persons within a cosmic society, and persons, even immortal ones, can disagree. That disagreement is where the final century becomes a lesson. Total destruction has failed, or perhaps has been softened. The question becomes what comes next. If humanity continues, it cannot continue exactly as before. The gods will not simply forget the noise, the crowding, the imbalance, the broken obligations, or the terrifying ease with which water erased cities. A new arrangement must be imagined. The survivor waits below with smoke on his clothing. He does not know the full debate above him. He only sees the fire and the wet land, the animals shifting nearby, and the faces of the living turned upward. The air is strangely still after so much rain. Silence feels almost too large. It's not peace. It is the pause before terms are spoken. A quirky fringe tidbit appears in modern retellings of this divine regret. Some writers have suggested that the gods' dependence on offerings hints at an ancient memory of rulers needing tribute from subject populations. The idea is not absurd as a broad comparison, though the more dramatic claim quickly outrun evidence. Still, myth often dresses social realities in cosmic clothing. A hungry palace and a hungry heaven can look uncomfortably alike. In the upper assembly, accusation moves carefully. Who warned the human who allowed the seed of life to remain? Who will bear blame for divine command undone? Enki's defense, in later tradition, is clever. He does not deny wisdom. He reframes it. Instead of destroying all humanity, why not control human increase through limits? Misfortune, mortality, and social checks. The flood becomes not the last word, but a brutal correction. Scholars continue to debate how divine regret should be interpreted in these myths. Some read it as theological reflection on the danger of excessive punishment. Others see a political message about restraint in rulership, warning that a ruler who destroys his subjects also destroys his own foundation. Another view treats the scene as an ancient meditation on interdependence. Power without relationship becomes sterile. That phrase settles into the mud. Power without relationship becomes sterile. The gods regret their hunger because hunger reveals need. To need is to be bound. The immortal order may command storms, but it still looks toward the smoke of a mortal fire. Humanity is fragile, troublesome, loud, and brief, yet without it, the divine economy falters, the temples would stand empty, the songs would die in unshaped throats, the fields would grow wild without hands to cut canals and lift offerings. You look across the drowned land and understand why regret must enter the story. Without regret, the flood would be only violence. With regret, it becomes a wound inside the cosmos itself. The gods are not untouched by what they have done. Their decision has changed them, or at least changed the terms under which they view humanity. Below, Ziusudra may sense none of this clearly. Perhaps he feels only the wind shift. Perhaps the smoke rises straighter. Perhaps a hush passes through the survivors, though no one can say why. The animals settle, the fire crackles, a child wipes mud from her cheek and watches the sky as if expecting a face to appear. No face appears. Instead, a new fear arrives, quieter than flood. If the gods can regret, then the world is not governed by perfect certainty. It is governed by powers who decide, disagree, correct, and remember. That is almost comforting, and almost worse. A perfect machine cannot be persuaded. A regretful God might be, but a regretful God has already shown what can happen before regret comes. The smoke thins as the offering burns down. Ash gathers on wet ground. The survivors wait for some sign of acceptance, some shape in the clouds, some lowering of danger. The air remains pale and open. Nothing explains itself. Yet the hidden structure has shifted. Humanity survives not because it deserves complete innocence, and not because the gods are entirely merciful. Humanity survives because destruction itself becomes unbearable to the order that ordered it. The makers discover the cost of unmaking. The divine household, deprived of its servants, nearly becomes empty. The regret of the gods is not stopped, it is practical, sacred, and frightening. As evening lowers over the waterlogged earth, the fire fades to red. The first stars appear in a sky washed clean of dust. The survivors gather close. Not yet ready for sleep, not yet ready to speak of rebuilding. Above them, the divine assembly retreats into mystery, carrying the memory of smoke from a world almost lost. And somewhere in that mystery, hunger becomes law. A new limit settles over humanity like evening mist. You do not see it fall. There is no visible chain, no carved decree lowered from heaven, no shining boundary drawn across the mud, yet the world feels altered. The air after the flood is clean, but not innocent. Every breath now seems counted by something older than breath itself. You stand on damp ground where the first fires of survival burn low. The people gathered there are alive, but they no longer belong to the same human story. They have passed through judgment, secrecy, water, darkness, and return. Their eyes move differently. They look at the sky with gratitude and suspicion together. That is a difficult expression to wear, but history gives it to survivors often. The great change is not only that some lived, it is that life continues under restriction. In Mesopotamian flood traditions, the gods do not simply restore the previous world, they arrange boundaries, pressures, and controls upon human increase. Later versions speak of shortened lives, mortality, social limits, and forces that prevent humanity from overwhelming the order again. The flood is not the final silence, it becomes the beginning of regulation. Mainstream scholarship confirms that ancient Mesopotamian myths often treat mortality as part of the human condition established by the divine decision. Researchers at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have examined how Mesopotamian literature contrasts immortal gods with brief labouring humans. The human body is useful, passionate, and temporary. It can build a temple, write a tablet, raise a child, and vanish into dust without troubling the stars very much. That thought is not comforting, yet it is strangely honest. In the renewed world, kingship must also accept limits. A king may call himself chosen, beloved, mighty, shepherd, or builder. He may stamp his name on brick and raise walls against the plain. Still, the old impossible reigns belong to a vanished age. The long lives before the flood recede into mythic distance. Later rulers become more recognisably human, even when their inscriptions are trying very hard not to admit it. You enter a royal court rebuilt on higher ground. The floor smells of fresh plaster and damp reed. Officials stand with tablets under their arms, ready to restart order through the miracle of lists. Grain must be assigned, labour must be organised, boundary dispute must be judged, survivors must become subjects again. Because administration is apparently one of humanity's most stubborn instincts. A ruler listens while priests speak of proper rights. He nods with solemn patience. He understands that kingship has survived, but not untouched. The flood has exposed something no crown can erase. A king may stand above his people, but he cannot stand above water, famine, divine anger, or the final weakness of his own body. Power has been reminded of mud. A quirky tidbit from Mesopotamian kingship is that rulers often presented themselves as shepherds of the people. It is a warm image, full of care and guidance, until you remember that shepherds also count, direct, shear, and occasionally decide which animals are useful. Ancient political metaphors were rarely as gentle as they looked. Very charming, slightly suspicious. The new limit also enters the household. A child is born beside a wall still stained by floodwater. Her first cry rises into a room where adults suddenly fall silent. New life now feels like a question asked of the gods. Will this child live long? Will the fields hold? Will the world remain stable enough for her to learn names, songs, and the proper way to carry water without spilling half of it? Childhood itself becomes an act of trust. The mother presses the infant to her chest. Her face shows exhaustion and awe. Around her, women bring warm cloth of water and whispered blessings. No one speaks of decrees in that moment. No one needs to. Every human birth is already a contradiction. The species has been nearly judged out of existence. And yet here is a mouth opening for milk. Scholars continue to debate how myths of shortened lifespan and post-flood limitation relate to broader ancient concerns about population, order, and royal authority. Some interpret these limits as mythic explanations for why humans are mortal and vulnerable. Others see them as reflections on social control, where cosmic law justifies boundaries upon growth, desire, and ambition. The debate remains open because the myths work on many levels at once, like a temple seen by torchlight. You walk toward the fields where new canals are being cut. The work is slower now, almost reverent. Men measure the banks carefully. Women carry baskets of seed grain as if carrying temple treasure. Children gather reeds from the margins and are told not to wander too far. Every task is familiar, yet each one carries the memory of failure. A canal is no longer only a canal, it is a promise not to be careless with water again. But humans are not built for perfect caution. That is part of the unease. The same people who fear the flood will eventually build boldly, argue loudly, desire greatly, and forget selectively. Forgetting is one of humanity's survival tools, and one of its greatest dangers. Without forgetting, grief would crush every morning. With too much forgetting, warnings become decorations. The final century has become a warning about scale. Cities may grow, but not without cost. Kings may rule, but not forever. Fields may feed, but not endlessly. Some rituals may soothe, but not mechanically. Humans may multiply, but not without disturbing the balances that sustain them. The story does not hate humanity. It mistrusts human excess with the weary knowledge of someone who has seen a banquet become a riot. A temple scribe records offerings in a new archive. His stylus moves over clay still damp from the river plain. The marks are precise, they restore continuity. A basket of barley is no longer only food, once written, it becomes part of order. Yet the scribe pauses before pressing the next line. He knows tablets can survive, but he also knows they can dissolve. Writing feels powerful until water enters the room. That awareness changes the hand. A new law does not need to be carved in one place. It can exist in lifespan, hunger, childbirth, illness, social strain, and the ordinary uncertainty of every harvest. The gods do not need to send another flood each year. Limitation has become internal. Humanity carries its boundary inside flesh. Each body is a small hourglass, sealed in sin and skin. In the evening, elders gather near a fire and speak softly of the old world. Their stories already differ. One remembers the storm lasting longer. Another insists the first bird returned at a certain hour. Another says the gods were angry. Another says the gods were afraid. A child listens and turns these fragments into inner pictures. This is how memory becomes tradition. This is how tradition becomes warning. This is how warning, eventually, becomes story told beside sleep. The new limit is not merely death, it is uncertainty. No person knows the count of their days. No king knows whether his city will outlast his name. No priest knows whether the ritual will be enough. No farmer knows whether the river will behave. Humanity continues inside this not knowing, building anyway, singing anyway, loving anyway, which may be the most defiant act of all. Night covers the renewed settlement. The fires dim, the infant sleeps. The king's officials seal their tablets. The canals glimmer under starlight, somewhere in the reeds. Frogs begin their patient song, as if the world has not been unmade and remade at all. But the people know. The century has ended, yet the limit remains. Echoes travel farther than walls. You follow them out of the drowned plain and into later cities, where scribes sit under different kings, speak related tongues, and reshape older memories with careful hands. The clay changes, the language changes, the divine names shift. Yet the pattern remains strangely recognizable. Like a face glimpsed through moving water, a story survives by learning new rooms. In Babylon, the flood memory grows larger, more polished, and more elaborate. The old fragments of Sumer are gathered into later traditions, where a survivor receives warning, builds a vessel, endures the storm, releases birds, and offers sacrifice upon the changed earth. The names differ, but the wound is familiar. Humanity grows too numerous. The gods decide. A wise power preserves one remnant. Water covers the world people thought they understood. Modern scholarship confirms that Mesopotamian flood traditions influenced later literary cultures in the ancient Near East. Researchers at Oxford, Yale, Harvard, and the University of Pennsylvania have compared Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Hebrew materials, noting shared structures as well as important differences. The similarities are not simple copying in a childish sense. They show centuries of contact, adaptation, translation, memory, and theological argument. You enter a Babylonian scribal school, where a student copies a flood passage with stiff concentration. His teacher watches for errors. The room smells of clay dust, reed pens, sweat, and old discipline. Outside, the city is louder than any classroom wants to admit. Inside, the ancient catastrophe is being trained into beautiful order. Every copied sign carries water from an older fear. The Epic of Gilgamesh preserves one of the most famous versions. A grieving king seeks wisdom from a flood survivor who has crossed beyond ordinary mortality. Here the disaster becomes not only a memory of divine judgment, but a lesson about dim death. Gilgamesh does not merely ask what happened. He asks whether human limitation can be escaped. The flood story answers with unsettling calm. Survival may happen. Immortality is another matter. That is rather rude of the universe. You feel the echo move westward into Hebrew tradition, where the flood becomes part of a different sacred story. The moral tone changes, the divine character changes. The reason for destruction is framed through corruption, violence, and covenant. Not merely noise or divine discomfort, yet the bones of the older pattern remain visible, a warned survivor, a vessel, animals preserved, waters rising, a sacrifice, a new arrangement for human life. This does not make either tradition less meaningful. It makes the ancient world more connected. Stories did not live in sealed jars. Traders, exiles, scribes, priests, conquerors, and refugees carried memory across roads and rivers. A tale could be translated, argued with, purified, expanded, or turned toward a new theological horizon. The flood did not remain one story, it became a family of stories. A quirky fringe tidbit follows this trail with impressive enthusiasm. Some modern writers have tried to connect nearly every flood myth on Earth into one single lost global event, sometimes adding vanished continents, ancient maps, or hidden libraries. Serious scholars treat such sweeping claims carefully and often skeptically. Yet the instinct is understandable. When people across many cultures remember overwhelming waters, the human mind reaches for one great source. The more cautious truth may be even more interesting. Floods happen in many river societies. Coastal storms happen, tsunamis happen, seasonal water can bless and destroy. Human communities remember local catastrophe through the language of sacred meaning. Similar experiences can create similar stories, while specific traditions can also influence one another. History rarely gives one tidy bowl when it can spill the whole pantry. In Greece, echoes appear in tales of Deucalion and Pyrrha, where a flood destroys a corrupted generation and a remnant helps renew humanity. The setting is different, the gods are different, and the texture belongs to another world of mountains, temples, and Mediterranean light. Yet the old shape returns, the human race is reduced, judged, and restarted. Stones become bodies in one version, and creation itself feels rough, improvised, and strangely earthy. You stand for a moment on a Greek hillside after imagined rain. The air smells of pine resin and wet stone, not marsh reed and river mud. Still, the silence after catastrophe feels related. Survivors look at an emptied world and ask what humans are for. The question has changed clothing, not vanished. Scholars continue to debate how much later flood traditions owe directly to Mesopotamian sources, and how much they reflect broader ancient patterns of catastrophe storytelling. Some researchers emphasize textual parallels and historical contact, especially in the ancient Near East. Others warn that shared motifs do not always prove direct borrowing. Since floods are common human experiences, the debate remains open, and that openness keeps the echo alive. You return to the scribal shelves. A tablet copied in one century becomes the ancestor of another copy in a later century. Damaged line invites interpretation. A divine name is translated. A local memory attaches itself to an older structure. The story survives because scribes are both faithful and creative. They preserve, but they also choose. Every tradition is a river, not a stone. The final century of humanity, as imagined through Sumerian and later records, becomes something larger than its original floodplain. It becomes a warning that civilizations carry forward because they recognize themselves in it. Too much noise, too much violence, too much pride, too much forgetfulness, too much dependence on systems people assume will always hold. The trigger changes from text to text, but the human anxiety remains steady. A Babylonian priest may hear in it the danger of disturbing divine order. A Hebrew writer may hear the crisis of moral corruption. A Greek storyteller may hear the cleansing of a fallen age. A modern archaeologist may hear layered memory, river behaviour, social stress, and literary inheritance. None of them holds the entire flood. Each one carries a vessel through part of the dark. That image is worth keeping. Across cultures, the flood survivor becomes a troubling figure. He is not merely fortunate. He is chosen, burdened, and separated. He knows that humanity can vanish. He knows that memory can become duty. He stands at the edge between one order and another, carrying seed, story, and sorrow. Later civilizations preserve him because they understand, at some hidden level, that every society wants one witness to remain. Even museums become part of this echo. Clay tablets rest behind glass under soft modern light. Visitors move past with headphones, children, guidebooks, and coffee waiting somewhere outside. The tablets look small, almost harmless, yet inside them are cities, gods, storms, kings, animals, jokes, terror, and the oldest human habit of asking whether the world has limits. The echo does not answer, it repeats. By evening, the later civilizations blur together in your mind. Babylonian clay, Hebrew parchment, Greek stone, museum glass, university libraries, laying on a city window. Each holds a fragment of the same uneasy inheritance. Humanity remembers water because water once taught it humility, or because stories made humility visible through water. Perhaps both are true. The old Sumerian record does not stay buried in Sumer. It moves through language, faith, scholarship, and imagination. It becomes altered shadow, sacred warning, bedtime terrace, and philosophical mirror. The final century becomes less a date than a pattern carried forward by those who fear endings and continue building anyway. Some echoes fade, this one keeps returning. Uncertainty is where the tablets become most alive. You stand in a quiet research room, far from the river plain, where the light is soft and controlled, and the air carries the scent of paper, dust, and polished wooden tables. A clay tablet rests in a padded support, small enough to seem almost shy. Its broken edge looks like dried bread. Its signs are crowded, damaged, and patient. A scholar bends over it with careful eyes. She does not touch it carelessly. Nobody sensible manhandles 4,000 years of human memory. Unless they want every archaeologist in the building to faint at once, the tablet is fragile, but the questions around it are larger than any one room. Did these flood traditions preserve or remember disaster? Did they encode theology? Did they serve kingship? Did they explain mortality? Did they comfort people after real loss? The answer is not a single door. It's a set of half-lit passages. Mainstream resistance and mere confirms that ancient Mesopotamian flood stories survive in multiple versions, copied across centuries by scribes working within changing languages, cities, and religious systems. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania have shown that each version carries both inheritance and alteration. A Sumerian fragment may preserve one emphasis, a later Babylonian text may expand another. No tablet speaks from pure origin. Every tablet has a history. That is the first difficulty. The record is broken, literally broken. Lines are missing, beginnings vanish, endings crumble, names survive where motives do not. A divine decision may be clear in one version and obscure in another. A flood may appear as historical memory in one reading and cosmic judgment in another. You cannot press certainty into clay after the clay has already lost part of itself. Still, scholars keep trying, because trying is the honourable madness of history. In one corner of the room, maps of southern Mesopotamia show ancient river channels, settlement patterns, and excavation sites. The land itself has changed across millennia. Rivers wander, sediments build, cities rise, decline, and vanish beneath mounds. A place that was once near water may now stand dry and distant. A mound in the desert may hold streets where people once smelled fish. Smoke, mud, and bread. Archaeology provides another kind of testament. Excavations in Mesopotamia have revealed flood deposits at certain sites, though these layers vary in date, extent, and interpretation. Some early excavators were eager to connect such deposits with famous flood stories. Later researchers became more cautious, which is generally what happens after excitement meets stratigraphy. The evidence supports major local flooding in some places, but not a single simple event covering all human civilization. That caution does not weaken the story. It makes it more interesting. A regional flood can still destroy a world, if that world is the one you live in. When your house, field, temple, neighbours, graves, and roads are swallowed, you do not need the entire planet underwater to understand apocalypse. Human scale is local before it is cosmic. The open scholarly debate remains vivid. Some researchers view the flood traditions as mythologized memories of serious Mesopotamian floods. Others stress their literary and theological purpose, arguing that they explain human mortality, divine authority, and the fragile bond between gods and people. A third approach weaves these together, suggesting that environmental experience, social anxiety, and religious imagination shaped one another over time. This combined view may feel less dramatic, but it better respects ancient complexity. You turn from the maps to climate studies. Researchers have explored shifts in rainfall, river behaviour, salinization, and settlement patterns in the broader ancient Near East. Scientific journals have published studies on climate variability and social change in early civilizations, though the relationship is rarely simple. Climate can pressure a society, but people respond through politics, trade, technology, belief, conflict, and luck. Weather opens the wound. Human systems decide how deep it goes. A quirky fringe tidbit hovers near every discussion of Sumerian records. Some readers insist that the tablets contain secret timelines for the future, hidden warnings about modern humanity, or coded predictions of a final century yet to come. Historians do not accept these as established readings. Still, the desire is revealing. People look at ancient endings because they fear their own. The clay becomes a mirror, and sometimes we mistake our reflection for a prophecy. That does not mean the records are harmless. They can still warn without predicting. A myth does not need a calendar to be true in the deeper human sense. The Sumerian and Mesopotamian flood traditions speak about overgrowth, imbalance, dependence, arrogance, divine distance, ecological vulnerability, and the terrifying speed with which order can fail. These are not ancient problems only, they are human problems wearing old sandals. In the research room, a student studies a transliteration beside a photograph. The original signs are hard to read, so the text passes through layers, tablet to copy, copy to scholarly edition, sign to sound, sound to translation, translation to interpretation. At every step, something is gained and something is risked. The past does not walk into the present on its own. It is carried, and carriers have hands that tremble. The student pauses over a damaged line. A bracket marks what is missing. That little bracket is honest. It says, "Here the past is buoyant. It does not pretend. It does not fill the gap with confidence just to soothe the reader." Good history depends on that humility. Bad history hates brackets. It wants every broken place repaired with excitement, even when the repair is imaginary. Yet imagination also has a role. Without imagination, the tablets remain dead objects. You need disciplined imagination, the kind that smells the wet clay but does not invent a palace where the evidence gives only a wall. You need empathy without surrendering caution. You need wonder that can sit beside doubt without getting offended. This is where the final century becomes less certain and more powerful. It may not be a literal countdown preserved by ancient scribes. It may be a story about humanity living under judgment, limitation, and environmental threat. It may combine memories of real floods with theological reflections on why life is brief and order fragile. It may have served royal ideology, temple teaching, scribal education, and communal memory all at once. Perhaps the question is not whether the flood happened exactly as told. Perhaps the question is why so many people needed the story to remain. Why copy it again? Why preserve the survivor? Why keep the divine regret? Why remember that humans were almost unmade by the very waters that made cities possible? The tablet offers no easy answer. Outside the research room, modern traffic murmurs faintly through glass. A phone vibrates somewhere. Rudely confident in its own century, the scholar does not look up. Her attention remains fixed on the clay, on marks pressed by a hand long vanished. The ancient scribe and the modern reader meet across damage, translation, doubt, and desire. What scholars still cannot settle may be the most honest part of the record. Archaeology gives deposits, philology gives words, climate science gives patterns, comparative literature gives echoes. None alone restores the whole drowned world. Together, they form a careful, incomplete vessel. You look again at the broken edge of the tablet, it does not feel like failure. It feels like an invitation to humility. The final century, whether memory, metaphor, or both, remains just beyond certainty, close enough to disturb sleep, distant enough to resist capture. The clay keeps its silence, and the question stays open. The unfinished human record rests in clay, but it does not feel still. You stand once more before the tablets, in a room where modern light falls gently over ancient damage. Glass separates your breathing from the hardened earth. Labels offer dates, places, and cautious descriptions. They're useful. Of course, they're also very small nets thrown over very deep water. A tablet sits under the light with one corner missing. Its surface is crowded with signs, some clean, some bruised by time, some lost where the clay has broken away. The marks were made by a reed pressed into wet earth, by a human hand obeying habit, training, duty, and perhaps awe. That hand could not know the future museum, could not imagine your eyes. It wrote for a world of temples, rivers, kings, rainbow gods, and fear. Yet here you are. The old Sumerian record does not give a final answer about humanity's last century. It gives fragments, kings whose reigns reach into impossible time, cities remembered before a flood, gods who deliberate beyond human appeal, a wise power who whispers through secrecy, human shaped from clay, noisy with life, necessary and troublesome, waters that erase, then recede, a survivor who carries memory into a world no longer innocent. Mainstream research confirms that Sumerian and Mesopotamian tablets remain among the earliest surviving written records of human civilization. Scholars at institutions such as Oxford and Yale, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania continue to study them not as dead curiosities, but as active evidence for law, economy, religion, literature, and social life. Their importance is not only that they are old, it is that they show humanity learning to remember itself. That act of remembering is never complete. You imagine the archive before damage, shelves crowded with tablets, storerooms full of ration accounts, hymns, land records, contracts, school exercises, laments, royal inscriptions, and myths copied for reasons partly hidden from us. Some tablets were fired by design, others hardened accidentally in destruction, some were buried by collapse, some were lost forever. The surviving record is not a library chosen for our benefit. It is what time failed to eat. A quirky tidbit belongs here. Quietly strange, many surviving tablets are not grand myths at all. But ordinary administrative texts, receipts, beer rations, labour assignments, deliveries, disputes, and school exercises fill the clay record. Humanity's earliest writing is often less like prophecy and more like accounting. The universe may tremble, but someone still wants to know where the barley went. Honestly, that feels correct. Yet ordinary records may be the most haunting. A myth tells you what people feared. A ration tablet tells you they woke up hungry, worked under supervision, drank measured beer, and returned to families in dust-coloured streets. A king list tells you how power wanted to remember itself. A school tablet tells you how a child learned signs through repetition and probably wished the lesson would end him. The final human record is never only cosmic, it is domestic, bureaucratic, sacred, and stubbornly practical. The hidden timeline now feels less like a straight line and more like a spiral. Creation leads to labour leads to cities, cities lead to noise, noise leads to divine unease, unease leads to decree, decree meets resistance, resistance preserves a remnant, remnant becomes memory, memory becomes warning, warning becomes story, story becomes clay, clay becomes museum object becomes tonight's quiet disturbance in your mind. That spiral is difficult to dismiss. Scholars still debate how these stories should be held beside archaeological evidence, environmental history, and comparative tradition. Some emphasize their literary beauty, some emphasize theological meaning, some search for memories of real catastrophe, some focus on political order, divine kingship, and social control. The disagreement is not a weakness. It is proof that the tablets are alive enough to resist one narrow reading. You look closer at the broken lines. The missing spaces are not empty in the imagination. They ask for caution. They tempt invention. They remind you that every civilization leaves behind more silence than speech. For every tablet preserved, thousands of convictions vanished into air. For every king named, countless workers remain unnamed. For every divine decree copied by scribes, countless private prayers were never written at all. That is the great imbalance of history. Power writes loudly, daily life whispers, catastrophe leaves marks, ordinary happiness often leaves none. A child laughing beside a canal may disappear completely, while a tax dispute survives for 4,000 years. This is not fair, but clay is not interested in fairness. Clay preserves what happened to harden. Still, the final warning may hide in that unfairness. Humanity often believes its own systems are permanent because they are complex. Temples, courts, markets, archives, walls, canals, armies, calendars, rituals, and schools all feel like protection. They are protection for a while. But the tablets keep reminding you that complex systems can soften under pressure. Water can enter the archive, dust can cover the field, hunger can alter worship, fear can change law, noise can rise until heaven can rise. Until, or conscience can bear it no longer. The event that triggers the end may not be only a flood. In the deeper reading, the trigger is imbalance becoming irreversible. A society forgets the terms by which it survives. It asks too much of the land, too much of workers, too much of kings, too much of gods, too much of memory. Then something ordinary becomes final. Rain, drought, war, salt, debt, pride, silence from those who should have warned others. Perhaps that is why the Sumerian records still feel close. They do not merely tell you what ancient people believed, they ask what modern people ignore. Not with shouting, not with certainty, only through small wedge-shaped marks that survived. Because clay, unlike humans, can endure long periods without needing comfort. You stand in the museum as closing time approaches, footsteps fade. A guard passes softly through the room. The glass reflects your face over the tablet, and for a moment, ancient clay and living skin occupy the same surface. You see how brief a human life is against fired earth. You also see that clay without a reader is only earther. Again, waiting for attention. The old scribes did not finish the story. They could not. No civilization finishes its own meaning. Later generations arrived, frightened and curious, and continue the work badly, beautifully, sincerely, and with occasional academic footnotes that would have bored Enki into another flood. The human record remains unfinished because humanity remains unfinished. Outside, the modern night waits with electric lights, engines, glass towers, weather reports, satellites, hospitals, prayers, markets, rivers, and sleeping children. It is another world and not another world at all. The same questions walk through it in new clothes. How much noise can creation bear? How long can order be maintained? What warnings are already written, but unread? What secret instruction has been whispered, but not understood? The tablet says nothing more. It does not need to. It has brought you to the edge of the unfinished record, where history becomes reflection, and reflection becomes a kind of listening. The last warning may not be hidden in one lost line. It may be spread across every surviving fragment, asking you to notice the pattern before water has a reason to rise. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. The room grows quieter now, and your thoughts begin to loosen their grip on the clay. The tablets remain behind glass, resting in their careful silence, while your mind drifts away from kings, floods, councils, and broken cities. The old rivers continue somewhere inside the dark, no longer roaring, only moving with a slow and patient sound. You do not need to solve the mystery tonight. Some questions are meant to stay open, like a door left slightly ajar in a house where everyone has gone to sleep. The Sumerian scribes pressed their signs into clay, and those signs crossed thousands of years to reach this quiet moment. That is enough for now. Let the dust settle. Let the reeds bend in the night wind. Let the distant temple lamps burn lower, one by one, until even the gods seem less severe, and the world feels softer around its edges. The flood has receded, the archive is closed. The last footsteps fake from the museum floor. You are safe here, beneath the present sky. The ancient warning can rest beside you without demanding an answer. It can become only a murmur, a river heard from far away, carrying fragments of memory through darkness, clay, water, breath, and starlight return to their quiet places. And as sleep gathers gently at the edges of thought, the unfinished human record remains where it has always been, waiting, patient, and almost kind, not ended, only sleeping. Good night.